Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you so very much for joining us for SR 167 as we discuss the issues regarding sexual abuse investigation task force. And so at this time, I'm going to ask everyone, have we opened the doors? Okay, I'm going to ask everyone, if you're in the audience, to please mute your phone as well as those on the panel. And if you have to take a call, if you would, please just step out. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Chairman Barrow,
Present.
present. Ms. Brocksmith, present. Dr. St. Germain, present. Judge Green, Judge Guillory, Ms. Hadley, present. Dr. Hook, present. Mr. Robinson, Honorable Russell, Ms. Shelton, Captain Sanji, Dr. Thurber, present, and Ms. Wascom, present. And we have 9 present. Oh, and I'm sorry, and Ms. Wump will be the alternate as well for Judge Guillory?
Yes, Judge Watson.
Judge Watson.
Womble, yes.
Wump, I'm sorry.
It's WOMPLE.
Gotcha. Sorry about that.
Ms. Robertson? You, Ms. Robertson?
I am Judge Womble.
Judge Womble, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm looking at that.
That's right.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it. And I do want to thank everyone that's here. Last meeting, we learned as we began to look into the resolution, some of the barriers that we felt were actually restricting how everyone reviewed or evaluate or investigate cases. And so one of the things that we have done is looked at terminology. And so before you, there's a huge, nice binder that the staff has put together. And I just want to say thank you so very much, ladies, for this wonderful job. And I'm going to ask Ms. Trapp if she would kind of explain what's in this binder, as we have received information from committees that were assigned, as well as individuals who felt that we needed to have this very important information. So, Ms. Trapp.
All right, thank you, Senator. All right, so in your binders, we have the different tabs that are identified by letter. So in tabs A through H are different DCFS policies that they have submitted. Tab I is the state-specific language regarding valid and invalid that DCFS put together of some different language that other states are using. J is the spreadsheet of intakes and different dispositions from DCFS. K and L is information from the LACAC regarding their protocols. And then M is interview questions submitted by Dr. Thurber. And we also received a memo this morning from Judge Green that was not included in your binders but was emailed out to all the members. And Captain Sanji also has some information regarding the the Ascension Parish Sheriff's Office policies that he's going to get to us soon, so we'll have that for the next meeting.
Okay, great. Again, we want to thank you for putting together this binder. We know that this is a lot to try to digest this morning, so we're not going to ask individuals to do that. But hopefully by the time we have the next meeting next month, you would have had an opportunity to review this and give us your thoughts. But I will say that I serve on several different panels and reviews and committees, and one of the things that we have learned that I believe that this is going to be extremely helpful with is the fact that this issue is not just an issue for this particular matter, but across the board. As I'm seeing, I serve on the Child Death Review panel. I serve on several panels, but these are the ones that recently I've attended hearings. And one of the things that have come up repeatedly, power-based violence, is how language is used, how it's interpreted by everyone involved in cases. And so I will say that I believe this is going to be extremely helpful to us as we navigate to make this system more cohesive while also addressing the issues at hand. So at this time, I know that we have individuals here to provide testimony, and I'm going to ask that they begin to make themselves available or come to the table. I know that we had the Department of Children and Family Services here. And you guys are the first tab, if I remember correctly, right? Yeah. Please introduce yourselves, and if you have not filled out a white card, if you would do so, I would greatly appreciate it. Hold up, wait a minute, you're not on. She's on now? I don't know. Okay, all right.
Mona Chapman, Deputy Assistant Secretary in Child Welfare with DCFS.
Leslie Lyons, I'm the regional, regional administrator with DCFS for Orleans, Covington, Thibodeau, and Baton Rouge regions.
Sherry Powell, Deputy General Counsel for Child Welfare for the Department of Children and Family Services.
Thank you, ladies.
We would like to begin with just a short introduction and then just open it up for whatever questions the task force may have. What we wanted to do is really just clarify, there was a lot of discussion about last time what DCFS investigates and when we're involved. And I think to lay the groundwork of making sure the panel is aware of what we do investigate and what we don't. And so, you know, when the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, is not a parent or a caretaker, DCFS does not investigate. So it'll be important moving forward when we think about different protocols of thinking about when DCFS is involved and when we're not. So we just wanted to open up with that.
I think that's a really good point to note. So when it's not the parent or guardian, tell me that process.
So for in the instance of like a child-on-child sexual assault or an incident, or where the perpetrator may be an out-of-home, an uncle who the child visited one time, or someone like that, those are directly referred to law enforcement, and they coordinate those investigations according to their protocol.
So although they coordinate the investigations, are you guys ever engaged or involved?
So, like, according to the law, there's this jurisdiction, each court jurisdiction should have, or a jurisdiction should have a multidisciplinary team that's coordinated by the CAC and the district attorney, and we're a required participant in those. So some of those cases would be staffed there.
Okay. And so my question is going to lead to just what I had yesterday. And then I will open it up for anyone else who have questions. Yesterday, I served on the Child Death Review Panel. So there were 5 cases that we reviewed, and all of the death occurred under the age 2 and under. It was really hard to actually see and watch that.
Those are hard.
Yeah. But I one of the questions I kept asking was how many people were engaged at any point with those children. So one of the things, and that's why I said this is going to be extremely helpful, because the language, what was deemed as investigation, what was deemed maybe as neglect, those were a lot of questions that I had. But one of the things that I did note that all the children had Medicaid. There was one common thread. But the outcomes were the same as well in terms of what happened to the children. One particular case, it wasn't the parents, but it was, maybe I can't say, but it was someone, I don't even know if they were really related to the family, because sometimes that title does not mean that you are related. And the child was with that person. But again, at what point do you guys, or how many touch points when there is a call? Let me start there. When there is a call And if it is a parent, tell me the steps of what happens. And then if it's not a parent, tell me the steps of what happened.
Okay.
Maybe I start there.
Okay, and so we'll probably begin with the calls that would be without a parent or a caretaker. Those calls necessarily would never be received by DCFS. Sometimes they are, and we would not accept it for investigation because it doesn't meet the legal criteria for the definition of caretaker. But some of those are never reported to DCFS.
So if someone calls on the hotline and they're not a caretaker,
Correct.
you guys don't track that in any way, shape, or form? Like it doesn't, okay.
Yes, we do. So if it is called into the DCFS hotline, and it doesn't meet the definition of caretaker, what we would do is say the supervisor in intake approves it as not accepted, but refer to law enforcement. And we have a protocol where those intakes then are sent to the respective law enforcement agency for their review and consideration if they do not already have an open investigation.
Okay. And so, and if it is a caretaker, then you guys go through that process for me.
At that point, when a call comes into centralized intake, it's taken by an intake worker, and then a supervisor in intake makes a decision ultimately with the worker as to whether that case is accepted or not accepted and meets the legal criteria for investigation. At that point, if it's accepted for investigation and the reporter indicates, I would like to receive confirmation of that decision, an automated notification is mailed to the reporter indicating the disposition of the report, whether it was accepted or not accepted for investigation. And that notification letter should be in the packet that you all received.
And I'm not sure if we have this in here. So what actually qualify as a case that would be investigated?
Okay, it's as per the Children's Code, the definition of abuse or neglect, which is in, I'll have to defer to our attorney, what article.
603, Children's Code Article 603 is the definition.
And then also the definition of caretaker, which is in the same article.
But what type of cases rise it to get your attention? Like, so I can't find it in here fast enough, but I'm just trying to give me an example of something that may be what you guys would investigate. Because one of the things, and this is deviating a little bit, but it's all connected. So we have the highest child death rate in the country. And my point was yesterday, how many people had contacts with the family? One of the cases, it seemed like it could have been sexual abuse happening as well. And some of the children were old enough to go to school. And so I'm trying to figure out like how many times and what does that look like and what qualifies? What are the measures to get your attention that you begin to investigate it, and how can we get better at that?
And so we do also have a guide, what's called Appendix 4B is in our policy, which guides what allegations of abuse or neglect that are categorized in certain ways with descriptions of those. I do not think that is in your binder or information. It is in your binder. And so in that guide, it gives specific guidance and definitions of what the criteria for acceptance is and what the criteria is for validating that allegation, depending upon what the allegation is. So that should provide some guidance about what types of things we do or do not investigate.
Okay, I'm gonna stop right here and see if there's any additional questions. Ms. Hadley?
Add just real quick, we have, each region has a child death review panel, a group, and so DCFS participates in those too. So, for example, several of the areas that I oversee, they will send me case information to determine whether we were involved or not. And to look at that, we have an MOU with them, and we sometimes we'll catch cases that were not reported and need to be, where it seems like it was an abuse or neglect at the time of the death, but then an autopsy is to come in. And then the other part of those groups is to look at systemic issues like different agencies, system improvements, things that we can do for child death, to prevent child deaths. So there's the statewide death review panel, but each region has their own too, where we look at those cases intensively.
So when you speak about the systemic issues, because that was one of the very great correlation with all cases, and certainly poverty is at the core of each one of them. What are some of the things that you guys have been able to, how can we become more preventative? What is it that you guys are looking at as it relates to this as well as that? I mean, because there was a great correlation there, and when I sat there and I looked at those cases, I know that the kids now, I'm hoping, are in better conditions, but there were some red flags that were definitely, in my opinion, glaring, that I'm wondering, like, how many people actually came in contact with them, and maybe that there was some interaction, but it wasn't enough because it did lead to their demise.
So that's where we try to make recommendations from those groups, such as, safe sleep is obviously something that has come out of those groups big, because that's a factor in a lot of the deaths. Substance abuse or use, and poverty, of course, is an issue. So we do look at those type things. Firearms, securing firearms, can be a big issue. So we look at those and try to make recommendations, such as like the nurse-family partnership and getting early intervention in homes. So each group is able to make recommendation to the larger group.
Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Hadley?
Yes, I understand you guys mentioned that y'all don't investigate child-on-child cases. I work for the CACs, and there have been some cases where DCFS has accepted cases where it is child-on-child. My question is, I understand, before I even ask the question, I understand there's some certain discrepancies that would negate an investigation, but how can we make that more consistent? I feel like, especially for child-on-child, if it's siblings, I understand extended families, that'd be a little more challenging for investigation, but how can we make that more consistent to keep parents accountable to make sure that they're providing adequate care in their own household?
Let me clarify that a little bit. So I did say that we don't investigate child-on-child, but that is when there is no parental culpability. So if there's any parental negligence or awareness and they did not take action to protect, then those are cases that we would investigate. I think one of the critical pieces that's missing sometimes is that the information that we receive doesn't make that connection of how the parent is somehow responsible or has been negligent, which has led to that child-on-child abuse. So I think that's at the heart of what we could look at, is how can we get better information?
Right,
Yes,
and I think that's, part of the MDT process, which is very helpful because, you have a group of people who are coming together, and at the time the report came in at intake, there might not be information that the parent is culpable, but by the time the child's interviewed through a forensic interview, law enforcement, the CAC, there may have been observations or concerns, and at that point, a lot of us who have good working relationships with law enforcement and our CACs, we're able to have those discussions and say, oh no, we definitely need to be involved in that. And even if we don't have good working relationships, we are all at the table during an MDT, and that's part of the focus, is that we're able to say, okay, this is a concern. And I've seen even through those MDTs where you might have law enforcement thinking that may not be an issue or another professional, and we're looking at it and saying, well, you know what, we need to be involved in that. So then we can make a report and then open up an investigation.
Right. So how can we fine tune that, knowing that if it is siblings on siblings in the household, how can we make it on DCFS and to be more consistent to accept those cases instead of us having to find those buzzwords for the intake response to accept it?
And I would say, I don't know that we have to, any parent on any given day can have a child who something may have happened to them at school. They may have observed something on television, at a friend's house, sleepovers, all those things, and then come home and act out with another child in their home. And so, you have an issue where, is this a problem within the family where they're trying to handle it, or is this a problem where it's pervasive and systems need to become involved? So I think when it's reported through law enforcement, and we report it to law enforcement, but unless there's a concern that there's neglect on that parent's part, or they're just allowing, not supervising, all these things, then we wouldn't be involved. So I think it's education on reporters, when the child makes the first disclosure to a mandated reporter, and I think our CACs, some of them are doing a good job, and we're trying to do the same thing about educating schools, educating groups of parents, people who have regular contact with children. So when they come into contact with someone a child who's making a disclosure, to be able to assess and gather the right information.
Right. Thank you. And I have one more question. I know when cases are not accepted, you refer to law enforcement. What is the timeline like for when it's not accepted to how long it takes for law enforcement to receive y'all's report? Because I feel like sometimes there's a lag in law enforcement receiving that, and that's not to point any fingers on any agency because it could be on both sides. But what is y'all's timeline like to forward that information to law enforcement so that they can respond in a timely manner?
So every region has a position called a case assigner, and so they monitor the queues. So when a report is non-reported for intake, but it's for investigation, but it's referred to law enforcement, that case assigner, their primary job is to monitor that queue for that area. Some of our busier areas have two case assigners, so that we're keeping up with what's coming through. And then they have a contact person with law enforcement. So when that intake is received as not accepted, refer to law enforcement, it's emailed to a point of contact within the law enforcement agency. And then we keep records of all that too.
And who would be the normal point of contact that you would email?
It varies, so it just depends within the, law enforcement agency. They identify someone for us to send those reports to.
And then DCFS, to add, has local law enforcement agreements with each agency that kind of dictates or spells out some of those agreements of how we'll send, whether it be fax or email or whatever the protocol is for that jurisdiction.
And that is outlined in the Children's Code. There's not a time period. It just says that the referral should be made promptly and then in accordance with our MOUs, memorandums of understanding that we have with the law enforcement agencies.
And we also, if law enforcement, we also, have those MOUs, but if law enforcement receives a report and they say, hey, wait, we've got some information too, and we think you need to be involved, that's why those case assigners are working really well, because they're reviewing each and every intake that comes through as accepted or non-accepted, and then looking at it. If it's assigned to a worker, they're giving some specific information, like this is a high-risk case, these are the things you need to know, there's a history, all those things. And then if it's going to law enforcement, sometimes law enforcement will call that person back and say, hey, wait, we just had something else. So it's a single point for our agency sending to law enforcement, And I think that that's been a big win for us because they're getting specialized training. They're working with our intake director and learning what to look for, because we need to be able to have a system of checks and balances where there are a lot of different eyes on what's coming through.
Right, and this thing's more of a statement to kind of end my questions, but that's, I think, one of the biggest things that we need to focus on. It's not just on DCFS, but there's different agencies where we're not reporting to one another in a timely manner, where there are a lot of children, especially if they're younger ages, that we need to immediately forensically interview, because developmentally it'd be hard for them to kind of cover what has occurred to them if it happened months ago. It makes it more of a barrier with forensic interviews. And I think that'd be something to focus on our task force, is how can we fine tune our communication amongst agencies to where the younger ones that have had any sexual assault experience, if we can immediately respond to them in a more timely manner. And then, of course, with all ages, just making sure that they're not falling between those gaps. And where I've had cases where law enforcement didn't receive it for whatever grounds, not any one particular, but it occurred in May, but it was reported in May, but it finally were forensically interviewed in October. Wow. Why was there such a lag? So I think that's one concern that we could focus on, is how can we fine tune to where some of those children don't fall between those gaps.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hadley, and that was a great line of questions and answers. And I'm going to tell you one thing that caught my attention immediately was the word promptly, because that is left up to the discretion of whomever, right? Everybody's definition of promptly could be differently, and that's one thing that I think we need to take a look at in terms of identifying what that means and giving it a timeline. Also, the MOUs, I think, is also subjective. Not the MOU, but the entities that you are working with, because certainly I believe that there are some law enforcement officers that probably are more diligent than others. And so I would like to actually see what that looks like, but I think that's something that needs to be evaluated. But I want to ask you talked about education, and I want to ask you, what does that look like? So what does education look like for the educational arena for schools? What does it look like for the community? How are you guys getting the word out?
Well, and I can speak, I'm kind of here, I'm also on the board of directors of a children's advocacy center. In our area, one of the things that we certainly do, we do the darkness to light training, and we are getting out into our communities.
I'm going to ask you just to back up a little bit for me. So you're speaking from the perspective of the Child Advocacy Center or from the department?
Well, as a representative from the department on the board of a Child Advocacy Center.
Okay.
I guess it's kind of a double thing.
So is it happening across the board, or is this just something that's happening at that
It's
particular?
happening in some areas.
okay.
So it's not a DCFS training, but I'm saying that I do know, like, through our MDT process that we work through, that's legislatively mandated. You know, there is
NDT?
MDT, the multidisciplinary team.
Okay.
We provide outreach and education to the schools, and that's becoming more common. Also, from a DCFS perspective, one of the things that we do is we do often go into schools. We have to be invited or allowed, and we do mandated reporter training with mandated reporters to talk about, what you are mandated to report, what is a mandated report. I mean, how do you make a report, and the different mechanisms that you can make a report. So DCFS, many of our case assigners, the people who are also working the queues, they work with the schools to set these trainings up so that we can go in and talk to schools. We're really available to go into any entity as far as mandated reporting goes.
So you have to be invited, correct?
Right, and we also have mandated reporter training on our website too.
And Dr. Hook has been crucial in reaching out to the hospitals. In her former role as our medical director, she started those conversations, and there have been some educations with hospital staff about their duty to report and what to look for in regards to abuse and neglect. And we've also started a work group on mandatory reporting, and we meet every couple months, or maybe more frequent than that, but just to compare notes and see what they may need, what they're not getting from DCFS, or we can also share with them. Just recently, I think it was a nurse from Children's Hospital, and we were sharing how we needed, more detailed information and more information specifically from the doctors. And so that's also, I think, going to lead to better outcomes and in reporting from hospitals. Yesterday, we had an opportunity to meet with Baton Rouge Police Department, a representative, and from the DA's office and the
Can
sheriff's
you
office.
speak more directly into your
Oh,
mic?
yes, ma'am. And so the Baton Rouge Police Department representative indicated that he would like some training for his officers, that he has a lot of new officers, and so that's something that we also will be looking at setting up with the Baton Rouge Police Department, and that's something that can happen in every community.
That's really good. So my concern becomes just a little bit in terms of them knowing this information, because I heard you say they have to request it. And so how many of them actually know? And do y'all keep like a record, or do you have a file of how many people you trained last year, how many people you trained to date this year, in previous years, to see whether or not are you training the same people? Or are there different groups who are coming? I mean, I know there's new information and the laws are changing consistently because we change. I don't know how many years ago, maybe 2 years ago, in terms of what qualifies as emergencies. I mean, so how you guys tracking that?
Okay, so we do have, the training is through our training academy, and so what we can do is, as following this hearing, follow up with them and find out, can we report that number to you all? Can we determine what type of reporter they are that have undergone the training, and then send that to you? But
Yes, and what schools? I would like to know how many schools have actually participated. How many individuals have actually been involved and engaged, especially in the last year, with the training in the process?
So, and to add, I think to go back and say what we've also done proactively because of the
Yeah.
concern about getting the information and the quality of the information is we developed a mandatory reporter guide for what information from reporters we need to be able to help us with the decision-making. That was completed, I believe, during the summer. And we do have a list of those individuals who we distributed that guide to, which would include medical professionals, schools, and other stakeholders that we routinely work with.
So do you guys work or collaborate with the Department of Education?
We do. We have, mainly in the area of foster care, we have a liaison with the Department of Education. And then we also work closely with their licensing division as it relates to the licensing and incidents of abuse in daycares, because they license those as well.
But just in daycare. So this is what I need to do. I need everybody at the DS to do. If you have a question, because I can kind of see like movement, like people have questions or they want to say something, but your light is not lit up. So is that Miss Shelton? Wait.
Mine's working.
Yeah, it's not,
Yep.
we're having a problem. Same thing over here. I
Yeah.
can't tell, it'll blink on and then,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you have a question, Ms. Wascom?
I do, but Ms. Shelton, go first.
Okay. So let me see if I can.
I think I'm.
You are on.
Not.
Okay. All right.
My question was about MDTs. Are they operating consistently throughout the state? I know they have to operate by law, but across the state, are you seeing them operate consistently? And if not, how can we fix that? Simply
So
put.
I do think that is an opportunity to look. The law, the Children's Code article is like 507 through, I think it's 514. That does require the district attorney and the CAC to work together to develop protocols for investigating, and which would be inclusive of a MDT. Yeah. Yes, and in terms of consistency across the board, I think that would vary depending upon the CAC itself, but we do participate in them.
Yeah,
I
every CAC is different, but we should be meeting monthly. I can't speak for everyone, but that's part of our protocol. We meet monthly.
Okay.
And we always give out emails to inform our agencies. It's up to them to show up. We can't force them to show up.
And that would be, I guess, a question, if you're going, are you seeing everyone show up? Are you seeing everyone show
We
up?
have
And my
difficulties
question-
with some agencies, but we try to be consistent. We try to entice them with food and everything. And so, but we understand every agency is busy and short-staffed, or just there's a lot going on. But I know for our CAC, we meet monthly, and it's required, and we have to meet that standard. Especially as an accredited facility, we're required to have those monthly meetings.
Okay.
And to kind of piggyback off of, the education, we as CACs also, we try to adhere education in our communities. So if we can bridge those gaps of concerns and questions and speculations, we try to fine tune that in our community to educate them on how do you make a DCFS report? How do we report to law enforcement? Do we report to both, one or the other? So our CACs really take that responsibility to educate and offer prevention as well. We are approved in school boards. We have bridged those gaps where we go into the schools and educate children on body safety, as well as teaching administration, mandated reporter training, red flags on human trafficking, things of that nature. So we try to support and help all our agencies and get the education out to the community.
It's a wonderful support network.
Now, just to follow up with the passive sexual abuse.
Hold on,
having the
Ms. Shelton. Okay, so.
I think we're all on
You're on,
still. That seems to be the MDTs where it's kind of your safety net. If you get a report in and you don't see the passive sexual abuse because it's not a caretaker who's conducting the abuse, that it's your MDTs is kind of where I'm hearing that would kind of be discussed. And so that's kind of where I was going with that. Is that consistently being discussed? Or those cases that are being talked through? Because your example it was quite a while until it was reported. So that's where I was trying to.
And that's where
get
we
that.
try to educate and bring everyone together too. As a CAC, we're the neutral party. We're just kind of seeing the outside stuff working. And so when we see a need or a concern, as our CAC, we're voicing it to that agency and to other agencies as well, so that how can we be immediate response at this point, though we're late. So as a CAC, it's our responsibility to kind of keep everyone accountable, as well as how we can collaborate collectively to support these children. So we try our very best whenever we see those, like, we're going to respond either at our MDT meeting or like this needs to be a conversation now. We can't wait till that meeting. So we do our best to bridge all of that if we can.
And I would say, so I'm over 4 regions in the state, and in every area there is, an active MDT team. And I do want to add that, the directors of the CACs, the people at the CAC that organize MDT, they're very good. If for whatever reason, if we were to fall off, or not participate, we hear about that. And because it's not an option not to send somebody to MDT, because it's such an important place where we educate one another about everyone's role, and we learn where the gaps are, and identify gaps. So I think that, every CAC does operate differently, but half of the state, I would say, I know of, that there's an active MDT process, and there are partners that sometimes don't show up. And every CAC that I have had contact with, they actively encourage, and like she said, through food, through everything. And then if that food doesn't work, then sometimes it's a phone call.
Yes.
Because we need to be there. We have rural departments, who don't maybe even have someone assigned to investigate crimes against children. Right? That happens. So you might have a deputy who's writing tickets, And, so that coming on their case to the MDT helps educate.
Right, and we can only go so far. Like with those gaps, that's why we try to reach out to those agencies. One, to bring awareness, but then as a task force, how can we fine tune those gaps and concerns?
Thank you so much, and that is definitely one of my big concerns, especially in those areas where we do not have these resources, and oftentimes even the mindset may not be of such that we have to address multiple issues in terms of how people think, what they believe, and some folks they think it's okay. Let me see, Ms. Wascom.
Sorry about the microphone confusion. I have like several questions, so if y'all can just bear with me. But one of the thing that I was focused on coming into today was looking at the language. And Senator Barrow, before I move on, I don't know if when I'm supposed to, the feedback that I have. But one of the things that I noticed, I perused the website just to see, like, if it wasn't someone, like anyone in this room that would know, I need to make a report or I'm a mandated reporter, where would I go for information? And so just on the website alone, on the tabs on the left, it says child abuse or neglect. And then several down, it says juvenile sex trafficking. When you click on the abuse or neglect, it is not clear on how to make a report for suspected sexual abuse versus child abuse or neglect. And I think that there is some confusion on what is physical abuse and sexual abuse. Like, where would you make that report? If you were just like a layperson, to us it seems obvious because it is listed, but you have to go like down. And so I'm thinking about if a child makes a disclosure, let's say just to a neighbor, and they have no one to call to ask, like, okay, I need to make a report. Or they do know, I need to go on here, I can make a report. To me, it is still not user-friendly that it spells that out. And I do realize that there's obviously crossover, but if there's someone that's trying to make a report and there's not neglect or physical abuse, they're going to have a hard time navigating that tab. So that's really one of my comments. And Senator Barrow, I didn't know if you, whenever you're ready for the recommendations on the language too, we'll get to, because it does have to, I have questions for y'all about that. But I do have a couple of questions about what y'all spoke about. When y'all have intake employees, how many job openings do y'all still have to fill for intake employees?
And we would need to call up the
Yeah.
representative from centralized intake for that.
I mean, it's just a rough number. I'm not,
We have 4 right now,
okay,
and then total positions, 51.
okay. So you're pretty well staffed. Okay.
Well, that's
That's
the number of
relative.
positions that are allocated to DCFS.
Okay.
That's the number of positions we currently have.
Uh-huh.
But we are in the process of requesting and obtaining additional positions
Okay.
Because of the more need.
Okay, okay. And then,
So, Ms. Wascom, let me just interrupt just really quickly. So how many people total? You have 4 positions and 1 vacancy, right? But how many people total work in this office area?
Denise,
Do you need to, you need to come to the table? Yes. I didn't mean to interrupt Ms. Wascom, but I think this is important. I think we need to get
I
to that
think,
number.
I mean, it goes to
Yeah.
the rest of, I think, some of the stuff we've discussed.
I'm older.
No, that's okay. We thank you so much for being here. Introduce yourself,
Sure.
please?
My name's Denise Evans. I am the director of the Child Abuse Hotline.
Okay.
And to answer your question, 51 intake workers, 10 supervisors, 3 managers,
How many supervisors?
10,
Okay.
3 managers, and we have a vacancy for the child welfare consultant. But we have 2, soon to be another transfer, I believe.
So you talked about 4 and 1. Tell me about the 4 vacancies that you have.
Those are intake
Intake, okay.
workers. Another thing about, I think this is where training comes in place. And I've had a brief emails with Ms. Shelton about setting up a sex abuse from professionals. Training. We have 17% of our intake workers have 1 year or under, and then 70% have 2 years and under. We've lost a lot of our core staff that have a lot of experience to promotions. So that's where we are right now.
Okay. Ms. Wascom, I'll hand it back over to you.
She said that you're asking for more. How many more employees are you wanting to hire as intake?
Yeah, based on the calculations I did on the amount of time it takes for a call, and also entering the MRPs, which is the written reports, it came out to roughly 10 intake workers.
Okay.
Now, one of the things we're looking at systemically also is looking at different areas of what an effective hotline, the supports that's needed and how to streamline time, because time can be our friend or time can be our enemy. You have X amount of time in a day, then you have X amount of time of workforce, right? So that's what we're thinking, and one other supervisor to handle those timely. There was another point I was.
So it would be 65 total would ideally be filled.
61.
61. Okay.
Yeah, and I lost my thought.
Oh, you're
But
fine.
there was something else.
So I also asked the committee, the task force via email on trauma-informed care training, and some of the people on this task force, I know that that's redundant, and we've all been using it. But my question is also, do the intake workers, is that part of their core initial employee training? Is trauma-informed care training?
Care. Not specifically.
Okay.
And that's where, my recommendation, and right now we're working on training needs to be more specific and specialized with outside professionals, either an annual or semi-annual, because, of the experience, and then we do have a retention challenge for specifics to human trafficking, sex abuse, physical abuse, especially the forensic piece on gathering information, domestic violence. So those are the things that I'd like to develop, and it's part of our work plan that we're working on right now to look systemically at all the things that intake needs. Because, over time, our communities, the problems have gotten much more severe. When I started in 1993,
That wasn't long ago.
sometimes inadequate shelter. Now we have inadequate shelter, we have substance abuse, we have sex abuse, we have people who are struggling with mental illness and maybe not medication compliant. So we need to look at the whole system and the needs, and it's become much more specialized.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things also identified that we need to go back to basics is interviewing. Our navigating an interview on open-ended questions, closed-ended questions, and the type of information you need, how to move, redirect, and those sorts of things, and integrate that with the specialized training and know the information you need from the type of reporter, because educational reporters, they see the chronic. Medical and law enforcement is also often an event. So what does each one know and what questions you should be asking? And then integrate that with the professional training.
Okay.
And it needs to be trauma-based. I think we integrate that with it also, so I don't want to say we don't have trauma-based.
Right.
But I hope I answered your question somewhat. It needs to be more specialized.
You did. I mean, I have another question. At the last task force meeting, excuse me, because I don't remember who said it, but that there wasn't written, and I think goes to what you also said, that there wasn't specific written interview protocols for child sexual abuse, but there is for the other disclosures.
What we have is, we have certain things in policy of what you need to be asking, okay, of a reporter. And that should be geared to the type of reporter that you have, okay? But we don't have, and this is one of the things for an effective hotline is policy guide,
Yeah.
okay? We have our own guides that we develop, but it's not consistent, I think, as a unit,
Okay.
okay, and that we distribute. But we need more, yes.
Yeah, and I was gonna
think-
add, so I can't help but add something, but, you know, we've talked for years about the school teacher who's calling in about truancy. And truancy is not something DCFS investigates. However, that call about the truancy, if we just say, oh, the child's not at school, and we hang up the phone and we document that report, we haven't gone far enough, right? We need to say, so are there any concerns about the child's care? We need to be, and that, they are trained to do that. So a person may be calling for one specific reason, but asking those additional questions about the child's well-being, about the parents, because maybe the child's not coming to school because he's refusing to go to school, or maybe he's not coming to school because mom's passed out, or maybe mom's chronically ill. You know, we don't know. It's the why, that truancy is just the symptom of a greater problem. So
And
it's
that's
an
where
assessment at intake.
An assessment, and that's where the probing, the types of questions you're asking that lead to the next question is, why aren't the children going to school? I mean, the truancy, we need to get that information, like you're saying. It could be that, you know, mom has some mental health challenges, and generally this is different behavior for her, and maybe it's a medication compliance, you know, severely depressed. You know, that's the next thing is, why is she sleeping all day? You know, and the reporter may not know, but we need to make sure that we're exploring it with specific structured questions on the skills, because it's navigating an interview, right? It's navigating an interview. It's an art at intake and also in the field. And it's a really quick engagement. So how you engage them quickly to open that up for them to talk and feel comfortable, and explain what you're seeing. You know, explain what you've heard and who you heard it from. And what does this life look like if it's a neighbor or relative? What does this look like? Who's getting them up to eat breakfast? Who's getting them off to school? What does dinner look like? You know, what you have seen. Just more details to get a whole picture of what's going on. And then the child vulnerability on, this was where we could ask about trauma and mental health diagnoses, you know, medication. Is a parent compliant with making sure they have those things? And to have a disability, because we know those children are at higher risk. Are they young ones that, especially, you know, toddlers who are into everything, that's their job. And the parents just overall supervision. So getting that kind of information based on what the reporter may know is crucial. And so we're working on developing I think it's a 5-series just on interviewing. And then also reaching out to some other hotlines, we should be a 911 call to the intake. Now, the response priority of the field, they can't, if everything's emergency, nothing's emergency, and that's why we have to really assess But at intake, our availability, when someone calls, they get someone within a reasonable time to talk to. And other hotlines, how do they engage people quickly? So I think those skills in engaging and having a dialogue is really important. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm jumping around.
No, and what you're saying is so important, and it's kind of helping us in leading, at least for me, having me think about other questions or things that I would like to pursue. But Ms. Wascom.
I have one more like specific question that I had a memo to send to Ms. Trapp, but I didn't want to send it until I had some questions answered. Is the forms that y'all use, how easy is it to update the language on some of the forms and notification letters?
But don't go too far, Ms. Denise, because the board is lit up.
Yeah. I didn't want to submit the memo before today because before I did a big ask. That's my question.
Yeah, so the forms themselves are generated through, like the notification letters are generated through our system.
Okay.
And so changing the wording in the notifications would not be a huge change, but
Okay.
what would be a significant change would be all of the rules and the other systems behind the scenes that determine validity finding, the word valid, invalid. That would be a more significant change that, would be ideal to look at if for our new system that we're currently planning.
Okay. I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
CWIS, it's a federal
Okay.
language for a comprehensive child welfare system.
Senator Barrow, can I get into my recommendations? This sort of leads into it.
No, can you hold those for just a second? The board is lit up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to Dr. Hook.
When she said,
Yes, but please remind me or relight your
Yeah.
button so we don't forget. Dr. Hook.
Thank you. I did want to respond a little bit to Ms. Wascom as well. So right now we are looking at using technology to our advantage when it comes to centralized intake as well, and have been working to identify key trigger words that could escalate a call to a supervisor. So when it comes into intake, the intake worker would then get that call, but these trigger words would then alert the supervisor or manager that maybe we need to get on this call as well or need to pay closer attention. We're at the very beginning stages of implementation for this, and so of course there might be some hiccups along the way, but we realize that sometimes when our workers are being asked to make decisions about whether or not something meets the criteria for investigation, sometimes it is maybe a difficult assessment to make based on the information that they have, and we want to give them all the support that we can with the technology we have available to us. As Denise was saying, we are working with other states as well to try to figure out what are they doing differently that may be more effective, and we're very willing as an agency to make any changes that we can make. Sometimes we are limited by the technology that we're currently using, and some of those are, technology-based changes. But when it comes to training, we're willing to train our workers with outside training, and I think that's something that Denise has identified. We had been training internally for a long time with centralized intake, but we really, I think, for some of these specialized issues, need to bring in some outside specialized trainers to be able to deliver those types of training sessions to our workers, and making sure that they're able to fully be present for that training, and then make sure that we're doing it on a continuous basis, because we do know that we have turnover. Not with centralized intake, but with our investigative staff for CPS and foster care. We're in the process right now of doing basically an internal review of our training processes and trying to see what needs to maybe be modified or changed in order to better address the needs that we have for our frontline staff. And we have to be willing to maybe be a little more innovative, because what we're learning is some of these workers that we have now learn differently than I learned, or many of the people that are testifying today have learned. And we might need to really focus on short little bursts of information at a repetitive rate to help them retain some of this information. So, nothing's off the table as far as revamping our training.
So along those lines, before you go any further, you said that you guys have implemented. Have you implemented, or you implementing?
So we're implementing.
Okay.
We have the trigger words are live, but we're still kind of troubleshooting that process, because we want to make sure that it is using those trigger words is getting the effect that we want, and it actually is being routed, to the supervisor, that they're able to access that they're able to join the call. We went to a new call system, and whenever you transition, there can be some, some challenges just for everyone learning the new system. And we're teaching a lot of new things like the trigger words. That's something we didn't have before. And so we went to a new system. We're training workers on that new system, and then also training them on new availability of technology that they did not have before. Another thing that we are looking at is, and we are using this, trying to implement this, is AI-generated transcripts of the call, so that we have that available in more of not like immediately, but more of real time. And we're trying to figure out if that's going to help us be able to make, just better decision-making in the future with centralized intake and with our investigative process.
So what's the timeline, and who's evaluating that?
So we're working with our contractors right now with the call center, and this is something that we are able to do. Like, it's being done. We just haven't had enough cases to be able to monitor. I think it's been about a month maybe it's been 2 months now since we've gone live with our new call center, but very short period of time. And the initial was just transferring over to our new call center and training our staff on that. And then now what we have been doing is looking at the process of centralized intake and trying to figure out how can we make it more efficient, and then how can we make sure that these high priority calls are being, monitored by the appropriate level of, whether it be a supervisor, a manager, whether or not it be the director at Denise's level. We're trying to make sure that all of these calls are being assessed thoroughly.
Okay.
But it's still a work in progress.
Gotcha. All right. Does that conclude your comments?
The only other thing, and this is going back a little bit further to one of the comments that we had made about communicating with different agencies. One of the things that we are seeing when we're meeting with community partners is that there's a lot of variability across the state on how information is communicated. So, for example, one law enforcement agency may want us to email a law enforcement referral, but some may want a fax, and we may be sending information to one. Maybe we're sending it to a law enforcement agency that we think is responsible for the investigation, but when they get more information, that's not even the appropriate agency to send the information to. So there are some breakdowns in how communication is occurring, and that may be something that we need to look at on a statewide level to make it more uniform across the board on how we're reporting information to all agencies.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like it needs to be reworked. And I guess to some degree, depending on what parish it is in, I mean, that within itself creates a barrier, right? Because we know that all parishes may not have access to internet, unfortunately. I mean, that is the reality of where we are. So we definitely need to take a look at how that communication is really happening and the timeline. So who verifies, or how do y'all make sure that when you sent over that information that somebody has received it, or do you wait until they call you?
That's a good question. I think that it's variable across the state. So when we're referring to law enforcement with an email, then we'll have, that verification that email was sent. We have the sent email, but we don't know who gets it on the other side. And unless they respond with a file number or case number, then there's really no way for us to know what they've then done with that information. Same way if it's a fax that goes through, like we'll have a sent receipt, but we won't know necessarily what's been done from law enforcement unless we've had further communication with them about the case. So that's a breakdown in communication as well. I guess just to add, we're not always talking to a person. So when you're making a police report, then you would be given a case report, not like a number for that case, a file number. But if it's an email that's sent, then you may not get that in reciprocation.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
I think it's important to distinguish too, again, those reports that we do not accept for investigation that are then referred to law enforcement because we do not have the legal authority to intervene in any way further. But those cases that are accepted for investigation and assigned to an investigator, there would be that follow-up if we refer to law enforcement to find out what has happened, during that investigation. And they may not accept it for investigation. That very well may be the truth, is
And I
law enforcement may not accept it.
It can go anywhere from being a joint investigation with law enforcement and DCFS where we're stepping side by side, working the case together, or it can go from, we've referred it to you, who's it been assigned to, let me know what you're gonna do, those kinds of things, and then follow up, I don't have my report yet. So it just varies because every law enforcement agency is different and every case is different. And I think there are many law enforcement agencies that are suffering staffing shortages, just like we are. So that's an issue.
And I think something to consider with that when you don't accept cases, which there's probably some great probability why. But even like the way y'all level y'all's priority responses when you do accept cases should probably be the same way you level those non-accepted cases. If there's crucial information that that would not be deemed investigatable by DCFS but would be criminally charged with law enforcement, that needs to be an immediate, I need to speak with a person over an email or a fax. And then based on other types of cases, maybe an email or a fax would suffice. The only reason I say these things, because a lot of children suffer when it comes to criminal investigations because of the barrier of how long it takes for this child to be interviewed. Anytime a child is taking so long, there could be many barriers. Now they're being coached. Now they're being manipulated. Now they're being told, don't tell anyone anymore. Or now they're just, no one responded, so I'm just going to give up. There could be so many barriers. And again, this is not to specifically point to DCFS. I mean, this also goes hand in hand with law enforcement as well. They also need to know how to prioritize how to contact DCFS as well to be involved. But I think maybe prioritizing those non-accepted cases as well could be crucial to helping a criminal investigation.
Yeah, and it also, like we've talked about, every law enforcement agency is different. You have some law enforcement agencies that will not, like if it's a situation like that, they want you to call dispatch, make a report. You may have to go in and make the report. So, I mean, it gets...
Yeah, so this is a problem.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
it's like
it is
one
absolutely a problem, and so we are going to have to address that. And I think that we need to figure out a way. So I'm gonna ask you guys, I'm gonna ask law enforcement to help us find a way where there's some level of continuity, and then there is a person. So there's going to be a direct contact with a direct person, so that we know that somebody received it and somebody is looking at it, because this is not a good excuse. This is just not a good, and it's not at you guys. I'm just saying this is a breakdown, and it's a problem. And it's a problem that's leading to bigger problems because it was not addressed quicker or sooner. And so, which may lead to a child dying, which could have been avoided. So, yeah, we have to address this, and we have to figure it out. I'm asking y'all to help us figure it out. Everybody on the part of this panel, because I'm telling you that I'm going to be looking for a solution to this, because it's not acceptable that we have this gap and we don't know who receives it, and we don't know if they acted on it. We don't know that, and that's not good. Even if it's not your responsibility, somebody needs to make sure that the child is okay.
It's all of our responsibilities,
Yeah.
right? When
It
comes down
really
to
true. All of us. state all the way down. But what I'm saying, even though it's not your particular responsibility, it's our responsibility to make sure that it's done. Okay, Miss Honorable Russell, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I do want to follow up in regards to the comments made by the Advocacy Center as well. I have a great advantage because not only was I a prosecutor who did sex crimes for about 20 years, I'm also the director of our local advocacy center, so I'm going to come at you from two different angles a little bit. But back in the day, we had a lot of contact with our local agency. So we can call our local agency and we had relationships with them, but now we go to centralized intake. So we go to centralized intake, and then we have an intake maker make a decision, and eventually it will get to local. And so when we, and I think you mentioned this, when we want to get our children interviewed within 24 to 48 hours of disclosure, and we have to wait for a call, centralized intake, keywords, intake maker making a decision, and then go to a local case assignment, how long does that take? Generally, how long does that take?
If we're making a report, someone makes a report to the hotline, and I guess in general, I'm gonna have to say it's gonna depend on how many staff are available to work, how many on the hotline. And, we moved from the local approach to the hotline approach because there were several fatalities where decisions were being made differently across the state. And, based on community standards. So that was how we ended up with the hotline. But when a report comes in, it should get to the office within, and I probably need Denise to answer this question about when it will get to the office. The case, once it gets there, the case assigner then assigns it to the worker, and depending on the response priority is how long, before somebody responds to it. It doesn't mean that we can't respond before that. It just means that, if it's a 48-hour response time, it might be that because there's 3 other priority 1 responses that the worker's working on. I mean, that's not why the response time is what it is, but if that worker's not getting to it until then, that's the latest. But I'll let Denise answer about what's the general time between the time a call comes in and is sent to the local queue.
If we have available intake workers through the call center, they're ready to.
Okay, that bothers me when you say that. You say, if we have.
I shouldn't have used that word.
Okay, because that bothers me when you say that because, please reframe that because we have to. So let me say this, and I'm saying this for all my colleagues and for everybody that's listening across the state. We have to make our children a priority. And it needs to be reflected in our budget. And I'm going to keep saying that because as I listen to this more and more, and I know that this office is woefully understaffed and underbudgeted. But we have to look at those things that are really key and how they all connect. Now, this is not at you, Miss Denise, but I'm just saying, the first 2-3 words out of your mouth were, if we have. And that was a problem. So tell me how that works again.
Okay. We have 75% of our calls that come between 9 and 5, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And I might be going into too much detail, okay? But I like everybody to understand. All right, we have 52 intake workers for that 24/7. I've moved everyone, shifted staff to the highest volume, call volume, peak volume, right, between 9 to 5 as I can to still be able to cover the 24 hours. That's why I've requested more positions. We need to be available to the community when they call to pick up the phone within a reasonable time. So there are times cumulative delays for a hotline is dangerous. That may not be the right word, but it's concerning because we should be available to the community. You do not want a doctor in an emergency room having to wait to make a phone call or to get through, okay? If you have 100 calls come in and I have 30 staff, there's going to start being cumulative delays. That is very hard for me to watch, our managers to watch, our supervisors, all of us. But let me get down to the timeline. The average time for a call is around 20 to 25 minutes for an intake worker to complete the work. I do worry about them rushing because they know the call volume's coming, call after call. And once they complete that intake, that means they get the demographics, they get the information that the reporter is reporting with the questions that need to be asked. They get the addresses. They associate any cases that we've previously had. And what I mean by associate is they link them to that intake. Investigations, previous intakes. That takes time. Okay, they click a button, it automatically goes to where we store, we call it queues, store those intakes pending approval. Okay, if you get 30 calls all at once, then that means 30 intakes are going to hit the queue for review and approval. Okay, once we review, that takes about 15 minutes, unless there's a long history. Some families, we have 11 associated cases dating back 4 or 5 years. Some we have less if we haven't been involved as much. So that takes time because we need to review history. Because, concerns and red flags and considering history is important. For instance, relapsing, substance abuse. People struggle with this their whole life. And there's going to be periods of time that they, it's an addiction. And some, in history, you can see some immediately get themselves into treatment. They have family support. Others, they just continue, they just continue and suffer, and it gets worse, which makes kids more at risk. Okay, so we've reviewed the intake supervisor, determined that it's accepted for investigation, okay, for this instance. And when we close it, it's an electronic, automatic, goes to New Orleans, wherever the family resides. That case assigner takes it. Okay, let's say I click the button at 8:30 p.m. It immediately goes and hits that queue, electronic transfer to that queue within seconds. And then the local queue manager is looking at those intakes and then assigning as per response priority.
Which can be, so if it hits the queue at 8:30
PM.
You have an after-hours supervisor who's not on the clock per se. She's on call, or he's on call, they're on call. And they may check they are checking the queue frequently while they're on call, but if it's an immediate response at 8:30, and it comes in, immediate assistance, excuse me.
This is not in policy, this is something we put in place in 2011.
If law enforcement or
Can't wait.
someone's calling saying, I need somebody out here now, they've triaged it, they're getting on the phone, the worker who's taking the report is typing in a chat, telling the supervisor, we need to get somebody out here. That supervisor then is calling the on-call supervisor, who might be cooking supper or at her kid's ball game or whatever. And she then is calling out a worker to respond who's also on call, or depending, on what parish they're in. So we do have on-call workers for every area of the state, so then they might be responding if it's an emergency. If it's at 8:30 in the morning, it's going to
Case
the
assigner.
queue, the case assigner's looking at it, they're sending an email assigning the case to that person. If it's something that needs something immediate, they're calling the local office that it's going to and saying, this has come in, it's immediate, somebody's got to get out there now. Otherwise, it's going into their queue, they're getting the email, and that person, that worker who it's assigned to, and that supervisor see it, they know it's there. And then it's prioritized based on the response priority and the other work that's being done by that worker and their availability. I want to add, though, and I don't know what it's like in every area, but one of the things I know we always insist, call centralized intake, call the hotline, because it has to be accepted by them. But there are times that it's blatantly obvious we need to be responding. And we get those calls too directly to the local office, and we'll send someone because, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
That's part, go
Is
ahead.
that part of protocol?
Can I, protocol for
To
who?
when someone calls the office directly and then y'all respond before it's in
Yes,
y'all's-
that's protocol. So if let me just say one thing, this is very important. When we get that immediate assistance request, law enforcement is at a home, no caretakers, there's a meth lab, just as an example, in the home, it's unsafe right now. Local office needs to be contacted, drop the pencil, everything you're doing, and go out. Okay, we do not wait for the caller to finish. We do not wait for the supervisor to approve it, because that's could be a 25, 30-minute delay. We're calling right then. And that's a protocol that we put in place because you can't wait 24 hours on those kinds of things. Immediate assistance from the hospital, sometimes it's a school, sometimes it's the care center, forensic interviewing for sex abuse, depending on the situation. Now, it does have to meet criteria, but our intake workers have all of that by the time they're immediately saying, I'm on the phone, immediate assistance. That's a little bit
So we
detailed.
really have answered your question all around the
Yeah,
phone. but it's
absolutely did not
we're
answer the
giving you
question,
a
but I understand.
I mean, it really is, it
couldn't
really
answer it.
depends.
I know.
And, sometimes it may be that you're in the office and something has been assigned and the worker calls in sick. They're sick. Or there's an emergency, so then the supervisor has to take it or somebody else to take it. So we're really always balancing what we have and how to triage what's been sent to us.
And understand, let me make sure I don't want your job, so let me make sure we're clear. I would never want your job. It's almost impossible, but I do have some questions because if there's just a disclosure, that's not an automatic, you wouldn't say that's an immediate, that you need to respond immediately just because there's a disclosure of sexual abuse. And for us,
It depends.
well, it depends on a lot of criteria. It's not just the fact that there's a disclosure. And so on our end, a disclosure is enough because we want to start moving to make sure we get the interview. And that's when I think we go back to communication. And that's when I think every agency is working on different protocols and procedures, and none of us are on the same general rules. And that is where our children are getting lost and there's causing a problem. I also want to say maybe the local rules and what we dealt with locally wasn't working. I don't know if the centralized locations call-in's working either. And whether or not there needs to be regional call-in centers, and maybe the response time might be quicker if we had regional, maybe 3 or 4 throughout the state rather than 1 would work. I'm not saying that's the answer either, but I think we need to explore because centralized intake is not working when you talk about areas like Lafourche and Terrebonne. It doesn't work. A lot of that's a lack of communication. A lot of that is law enforcement and DCFS not really getting along, and I watch that too. And I also think, and this is for everyone, this is not just directed to you. Please don't take it this way. Everybody needs to put their egos aside and sit down and say, how can I do better? All agencies. And until we sit there, for 20 years, I've been trying to go sit down locally and say, hey, can I just talk about our problems? No one at DCFS will allow me in. They didn't allow me in as an ADA. They surely didn't want to talk to me as a DA. Our ADAs are trying to say, hey, these are the problems that we're having. And we're told maybe to go to higher up. And so for us, there is that lack of communication. It just is a general lack of working together. And I think part of it is, and again, I don't think it's anybody not wanting to do that. Everybody's so scared to make sure they're following certain protocols for many reasons, liability, and all the other reasons people right now are so scared. But I think all of us locally need to sit down, law enforcement, maybe your sheriff, maybe your law enforcement, maybe someone with DCFS, and say, how can we do better? Take the criticism and see if we can work better as a group. Because right now, I can tell you in our area, it's just a little broken. We have a great advocacy center. Shannon is fantastic. He has great MDTs. Everybody shows up, but every time we walk out frustrated because we see everybody's not getting along. Law enforcement's not getting along, and DCFS is not getting along. So for me, what I really wanted to say is response times, it's difficult for us because we're all on different pages with different rules. It is causing a problem for our advocacy centers and for our children who need those interviews quickly. And we really need to do a better job with communication, which I think is the number one thing we're hearing. Our children are not first for all of us. Number one for us is making sure we follow our procedures and protocols so we don't get in trouble. That is what seems to be our number one thing. We don't want to be on the news that some child passed away and who's responsible for it. We need to shift it where our number one thing right now is reducing the trauma for our children and focusing on our children and stop worrying about everything else. Just my
Amen.
2 cents.
Very well stated. Why does it say Dr. St? Okay, so what's the rest of that? Saint Germain. I'm sorry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I wanted to first commend DCFS because I'm a medical provider. I'm doing the medical forensic evaluations, and my team in my area is fabulous. However, I do now cover Region 9, which is the Covington area, and I've recently had 2 children who were at schools who were perpetrated at school, and the principal and teachers knew about it but failed to make a report. So these children were sent back to school and re-perpetrated. So one of those education pieces which I stumbled across as a medical provider a while ago was that online training. That is amazing. And I teach nurses, and I believe that is something that as part of my group that I work with is we are going to reach towards getting mandatory education for nurses in pre-nursing licensure situations also. And I wanted to just say, when I make those calls to you guys, there's that tiering system. I know that if I don't get a response that I want, I call back and I call for a supervisor. So if I feel like that child is in danger, I kind of do push that envelope, but I'm not sure how many people know to do that. So I'm thankful. All my calls have pretty much been answered. The other thing is I also sit on the child death review team and pregnancy associated mortality review. We're seeing a lot of children who are out there that are pregnant having multiple abortions, whether they're forced or medically induced. And so the human trafficking aspect is rampant. We have a tremendous issue in the greater New Orleans area. And so I have a child that I took care of that has had 4 abortions. She's 14. She's been trafficked multiple states. So I think those are the missing kids that are out there. And I guess to say on another point is our foreign-born children, those families that are coming here have no clue how vulnerable they are, and they're sending their kids out, and they are being trafficked at great lengths. So there's a lot of different issues. You guys, I have been frustrated. Everybody's been frustrated. I know that the team I work with at Jefferson Parish, beautiful team. I just can't sing the praises. When I was at in Orleans, same thing. But yes, the issues of not getting along, it is a lot of egos. So I just wanted to say kudos in that respect. But I want to say what you all have also been saying. That's great when you guys get the call, but we're not getting the call yet. And so can we partner with the Department of Education and have, I don't want to be punitive, but I want to just impress upon them how, I hate to say the word, but deadly this can become. We are having children's lives ruined for their lifetime by people not reporting. And that's medical people too. You know, the law doesn't say if you have confirmatory information about it is, do you suspect? And there should be 10,000 more of you guys out there working, because if we really had those people reporting, believe me, we would have, you guys would be so overwhelmed, because we know the numbers. We see it. I mean, I've been in the ER for 40 years, so we're seeing it, and I'm sure many of these folks in here on this panel are also seeing that. So I guess that mandatory training, that guide that you mentioned, I've never seen it. I would love to see it, and I will, through my channels, distribute that and make it very clear that that is out there.
And
I can tell you, oh, sorry.
No, that's fine.
So we did two things. Franklin Associates helped us send out some news releases. We also added a link we developed what information we need through the portal. Okay? Does everyone know when I say the portal? Okay. All right. So it's a guide that shows the kind of information we need in examples like sufficient information for us to make a good decision, insufficient, and give examples. So I know someone mentioned the tab, but this is under the mandated reporter section. And if you go at the bottom, there's a link. It is a portal guide and training that might be helpful.
And, we also just had a change last year in the mandated reporting law, which has also, I don't know, has it had an impact on the number of calls we're getting?
Which
Because,
law?
well, where.
It clarified.
It clarified.
The duty of teachers to report abuse that occurs within the school by another teacher or school employee. It was not clear in the law, and I want to recognize Ms. assisting and Ms. Trapp in that legislation, and I hope that that's going to help, and it clarifies, because there was some misunderstanding with the Department of Education as to when the teachers had to report, because they didn't feel like they needed to report to DCFS all of the time, and they also felt like they were not reporting when it was a school employee. And so we've made that clear that goes to law enforcement, because that school employee is not a caretaker by the legal definition. And so those need to go immediately to law enforcement.
It also clarified that you can't have a process. You can't have a procedure, so you can't have a rule that says you must go through the principal to make a report, because we would get anonymous reports from teachers
Yes,
saying I
and
was told I couldn't report.
And there was an Attorney General's opinion that came out that looked at school board policy, which required the teacher to tell either the guidance counselor or the principal, and then they would decide if the report was made and make it. And so the Attorney General's opinion also clarified that, that duty is the teacher's duty. If she's a mandatory reporter, or they must make that report and not go through the layers of the school to make the report.
Yeah, that was a school protocol to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So therein
We made
lies,
progress on that. So.
and that is a small progress, and because that was certainly a glaring issue, and I remember when that kind of came up, that they had to have these chain of commands to make reports, and depending where you live, that was a problem. But I want to go back to something that you said, Saint Germain, regarding education, because we know that every month, I believe, educators are required to take training, and I don't know what that looks like. Like, I don't know, like, how you guys, or this particular piece, have been engraved or added to what they're doing. When you said press release and a link, I'm thinking to myself, how many emails do I have that I do not click and I'm not looking at because of the multitude of emails I receive in a day? And if I'm not looking for it, then I'm not going to see it. So that bothers me. So I'm going to ask the staff to have the Department of Education to be at our next hearing, because there is another gap for me, because it's not clear enough how the two agencies are really communicating and what that looks like, that to me really yields great results. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. We have a list of all the associations that we sent it out to, that we could provide. This news release on the educating of mandated reporters. So it was several law enforcement associations, so they could distribute to the districts, medical associations, educational. So there were a lot of mandated reporters. Instead of send it to them individually, send it to the associations to distribute, because we wouldn't
It's a
know,
ton.
there's so many.
Yes, and I get it, but how many of them actually received it?
Well,
So they're,
or read it, or,
right. But I mean, just how many received it? That's just the first point, let alone read it. How many of them actually received it?
oh, I have the list.
And I'm talking about the people who are actually doing the work, not the association.
Oh.
But they got it. But how was that disseminated? How do we even know? And probably wasn't. 9 times out of 10. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
And
'cause I feel like-
Senator Barrow, so you know, the law does require that the Department of Education provides training for their teachers.
Well, they're gonna come and answer. Yeah, they're gonna come and tell us how that's done. Because I need to know. Because I don't feel real clear about that right now, and I'm not sure how it's really happening across the board. I suspect that there's some parishes that are doing much better than others, and then who is really monitoring how that's being done? I mean, when we had each board being able to decide who can report,
Right.
that's a problem. Okay, Miss Dr. St. Germain.
I just wanted to say another follow-up, and I appreciate the Department of Education being here, but the 2 teachers that were alleged perpetrators in that region that I work, they both were allowed to quit the schools, and they are now working. One of them is working as a social worker with disabled children.
Don't tell me that. Please don't tell me that. Please
So
don't tell me
that was my question
Please
is,
don't tell
why
me that.
is,
That's a problem.
yeah, so the licensing component is a big issue.
We will talk afterwards.
Yeah, that'd be great, thank
Because
you.
that is an absolute issue. Now they're working with disabled children who probably can't really communicate. Judge Wumble. And I do want to thank our judges for being here, because it really shows me just how important this issue is. I appreciate everybody, but I know that y'all have dockets and you are trying to get to all the cases that we're talking about today, but you're here, and I just want to say thank you. So, Judge Wumble.
Thank you for doing this, and look, this is important. That's why I make the time to be here, and why we all do. So, Miss Evans, it's wonderful to see you here. Question for you. I'm going to start with you because I do have a few. I have a few other questions too. But when somebody calls in to the hotline, is it an actual person answering it, or is it a machine? Because I couldn't tell from the AI comments and everything if it was. I got the impression that it was so it is a person. It is a person. Okay, perfect. Okay, I want to make sure. And do you have contract workers answering the phones after hours sometimes, or is it okay? I just want to make sure because that. Yeah, because we do have, I'm one of the judges that they call in the middle of the night, and I answer, have my phone by the bed I'm in the shower, getting out of the shower, answering the phones and all. But
Contract workers for the
those are
intake
mine.
or contract workers for the field?
yeah, are you having contract worker for intake? I know that I have the contract workers calling me in the middle of the night for CPI, but not.
That's
but
where
it's
I requested more allocated of staff
wonderful. Okay.
to cover, because after hours, some of them was serious.
Yes.
I'm not to say day's not, but that's when you have law enforcement and medical. many
That are
times.
calling. Absolutely. And look, I have had the sexual abuse phone calls in the middle of the night also. Those are it's been the emergencies that are calling in the middle of the night. But okay, I just wanted to make sure because we do have the contract workers with CPI. They don't have the training. They don't have the as much supervision. When you are having people come in, you said that a large portion of your people in intake have only been there less than a year. What is the shadowing procedure for them to be trained so that they know how to correctly interview everyone and get the information out?
Yes, they go through the new worker orientation for 3 weeks. Then they come back to centralized intake where they get specialized training specific to intake.
Okay.
Once they finish that, we assign them to a coach and a mentor that they shadow. And training takes 8 weeks, if longer, depending on the skill and the progress that they've made. Would I like it to be more the subject area from professionals, the different areas, human trafficking, sex abuse? We can train the basics, but it's the dialogue and the conversations and real life events from them that would be helpful. But we introduce them and give them overview, orientation, assign them to a mentor. They see them do the work. They hear them take the calls. So it's a pretty intense one-on-one.
Okay. And, you know, and look, the sexual abuse, that's what we're here about today. And that's, you know, and that's, it's complicated, you know, those situations. Just like I know that when we started talking, you know, my antennas went up when we started talking and DCFS saying, hey, we just only investigate the caretaker, and if it's the caretaker, is the perpetrator. But really, we don't. Really, there's, I would say, a great portion of the amount of cases that I see and have seen over the years, not just as judge, but as attorney, you know, and everything in the system, has been passive sexual abuses. You know, and I would say I've seen that much more than I have the cases of caretaker sexual abuses. You know.
We have to.
Okay.
I mean, yes.
So are we really focusing enough on that? Are we training enough since that is something that we see at a greater rate?
We do train. You have to look, just because it's child on child or just because it's an out-of-home perpetrator as defined by law.
Right.
You have to look at the parental culpability. Where did it happen, and how a reasonable person wouldn't you think you should know that?
Right.
As a parent, right? We do focus on that a lot, because it's not just, okay, this is an out-of-home perpetrator. You need to know all the details. And if they let them visit a friend, how well they know the family, and if they know that there was a sex abuse situation there, then why'd they
send them again?
You have to look at why'd you send them there.
Yeah.
So yes, we do focus on that a lot.
Okay, so that it's not, so the intake is not just stopping with, oh, hey, it's not a perpetrator, it's not the caretaker, we're shutting down. Y'all are going farther and getting all that information about, did the parent know, all that, okay.
And can I say one more thing?
Yes.
That's where, if you look at the data and pull the sexual abuse allegations, passive abuse will be there, but it's also lack of supervision.
Yes.
And lack of supervision, one of the things that I would like is where lack of supervision could be a number of things. It could be domestic abuse, it could be physical abuse, it could be sexual abuse. It may not be passive, but they may not have known about it, but they know they're going places where there's a possibility this could happen to their children.
They could be under the influence or not in a mental state to be able to watch their children, and things happen, and that's the type of situation you're
So we have
talking
talked about that as an
Okay.
application change on lack of supervision, different types of distinguishers on what kind of lack of supervision. That would give us more information about, in our QA to look at that closer.
All right, and look, and my issue is I want to make sure that jumps out, jumps out at the intake, because if it stops at intake, then we miss it. And there are cases that we see where it's been months that this has been going on, and that it's obvious that calls have been made or different things, and maybe there was just the reporter didn't state it well, so it flew under the radar. So also, okay, do we know if we're educating the police officers to say there's times where, maybe the intake doesn't realize that the parents knew, so y'all send it over to intake. Are we educating the police officers and throughout the system? Look, Jefferson, they're doing a great job. I can't say, but I'm hearing other jurisdictions. Do those police officers know? DCFS said they're not investigating because it's not a caretaker. But hey, if I find reason to believe that the caretaker knew, that I need to call DCFS and get them involved again?
Well,
I guess, and I don't know if that's a
There's a-
question for you, but that might be a
Okay,
question for
well-
somebody else.
so,
Yeah,
I
let you
think
go
that's
first.
gonna be, and do you want to? Okay, and I think, I can't say across the board that I'll let Mona answer that question, but I will say that we are, go back to our MDT process.
Okay.
You know, that conversation about, it may not initially be, but then, so that's where we are.
Okay, and that would be, something.
And that would be, and that's
Take
about
it.
relationships, you know, about us having having relationships with our partners, because we can there are several areas where we're having those conversations, where law enforcement, school officials, whomever it may be, can call back and say to the person who's over the local office and say, this doesn't sit right with me. This is what we're learning about. So I think you guys need to be involved.
Well, and look, I don't want us to have to wait to that MDT. I want
Right.
that police officer to say, hey, I know y'all said this wasn't your jurisdiction, but I got more information. You know, and I think those police officers, that's the line, that's y'all transfer it to police officers. They need to know that they need to call up and do it
Correct.
quick.
And I think it's different jurisdictions are different because of the level of emphasis the department puts on investigating child abuse crimes.
Yes.
Because some do and some do not. Some don't have the resources, but, you know, we have some areas where they've got specialized units, you know, and we're in contact, just like in New Orleans and in Jefferson, we are in regular contact with those agencies. My area director for Orleans, you know, receives all the reports from the Orleans Police Department that have anything to do with children, and she reviews them daily.
Wonderful.
And just to add, on a statewide level, there's been some work through the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement. They, I believe, subcontracted with a training agency to develop a specific mandatory reporting, understanding child abuse and neglect training for their new officers as part of their post certification or training, and then also an in-service training for the existing officers. So we did request an update as to where they were, and they indicated that they would be providing an update soon as to where the training is for the police officers.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I get, my last question is, you know, and this is something I want to just bring it to your attention, I guess, and ask also. You know, once the children are removed, or once we have a case over at juvenile court, whether it's a custody or non-custody case with the sexual abuse, how, you know, we are having delays at in some cases where, you know, if a child's removed, let me say, we're going to have a trial, or what we call, you know, our fancy word is adjudication, within 60 days, okay? Things move fast. We need the reports, we need discovery, we need those interviews, everything shared, and so that the trial can proceed, the adjudication can proceed. There are times where we don't know if the CAC has been done, who's scheduling it, what's going on, and it delays everything. How quickly how quickly can we get those done? And is there a rule? I mean, I'm just hearing promptly, but, you know, there's a delay and we need to fix it. How can we do it and how can we require it?
And I think that's probably more of a discussion with the LACAC and the CAC agencies about the different protocols that each one has on providing the tapes, and an overall discussion about maybe a statewide template or a statewide protocol of how cases are proceeded.
And you know, our reports, our investigations, we only have 60 days to complete them, but if there's a custody matter, that Form 10, all that evidence should be sent to the DA's office within, you know,
Within the
time
15
frame.
days?
Correct,
Yeah.
so.
It's not
right.
always done.
Well, and that's where.
So what's
you
the
know,
consequences when it's
so
not done?
a child could go home.
Yeah,
A
the child
be
could
sent
go home. because the adjudication is supposed to be done within the 60 days, okay? Then we get to court, we're at trial, and it's, oh, well, we haven't gotten this, we haven't gotten that. Well, those Form 10 should have been done within, and the Form 10s are the investigative report, and those should have been done and handled, and here we are within 15 days. And the way I've heard it, as attorney before I took the bench was, oh, well, the investigation's not complete, so therefore the 15 days hasn't run. It's like, no, the child has been removed, okay? So, but once we get to adjudication, the law requires, if a child's removed, the law requires that adjudication can only be continued for 5 days. Right. And we're talking about discovery issues. So discovery issues is our main thing.
And Judge Womble, I know you know, but for the benefit of everyone, it is our district attorneys who are vested with statutory authority to file a petition for child in need of care. And what we see is, and I know there are issues in your area that we certainly want to address, and Leslie and I will be talking to you, but the relationship between the district attorney and the local office is just critical in meeting those timelines, because in some areas, or rural areas, the DA's office may put a very inexperienced new attorney out in seat court, and that's a problem. And the communication as far as calling the office and saying, hey, I don't have the hospital records yet, I'm going to need that. This is a drug-exposed newborn. Did you get the certified records from the hospital? And when the DA's not reaching out, we have DAs that don't call and speak to our workers to prepare them for their testimony for the adjudication. So I think that's also an area that we need to strengthen, maybe through the District Attorneys Association, that we have a better working relationship with our DA's offices. And they are strong in areas. I mean, we know where it works really well, but then there's other areas that it doesn't.
And we have, just to really put it on the table when we talk about our staff, and there are absolutely times when we mess up or we don't. But there's also times where you have a worker walk out the door who had 40 open CPS cases, and 20 of them she inherited from the last person who walked out the door. And then the supervisor's trying to investigate cases, and the manager's investigating cases, and the regional administrator's investigating cases. And so what we would like to see and what we want to do is not what's happening, because the bodies aren't there. Or we have bodies there who are babies, who only have less than a year of experience. And we have a few people who have more than a year of experience. And it is, in 27 years, I believe we're probably at an agent within our most challenging time we've been within our agency, from the societal issues that we're dealing with and the staffing shortages that we're dealing with, and just the ability to get people and be able to keep them. So all that affects children. And if you're that person who's trying to hang on, who has 4 years of experience, but you keep inheriting those caseloads of the people who are walking out the door with their work halfway done because the supervisor's carrying a caseload and is not being able to monitor everything, then it's hard to hang on. And it's hard to, so, we're really challenged as a department at this time. And we've been in this similar place, but I just want to say that I think that, it has to be a priority, because we can't tend to everything, and that's why intake is triaging, making decisions about what we can accept, assigning response priorities, and then when it gets in that worker's hand, then they've got that hard work to do. And as you can see, when we're talking here about all the systems that we're navigating, just take a person who's fresh out of college, who's trying to learn how to talk to people about sexual abuse and removing people's children. And it is, it's a lot of work that goes into developing an employee and being able to do the quality work that we need to do to protect our children. It is not simple. It is so complex. And it has to be a priority, you know, it just does.
Thank you, Judge. I could really hear your heart too, and the work that this department does is extremely important. I have always said that the Department of Children and Family Services is the heart of state government because it truly is. You deal with the difficult cases. We cannot hire or get computers. I'm not going to say hire, but we can't use computers to fix the issues that we are faced daily. And it has changed a lot. It seems like it's changing every day, and it's becoming more complex and it become more challenging because of what children are being faced with and how old the parents are and the lack of support around families. It's not like it used to be. It's not truly a village like it used to be. In many communities, there's no such thing. It doesn't exist. And some safe havens for children are schools. And they have to be at the table. Ms. Denise, you made a comment about, it's been so much said here today, and I in all honesty, I still have not gotten beyond your comments, Dr. St. Germain. I'm trying to get beyond that because that just breaks me to it really breaks my heart to my core because I don't know how that happened. But you made some comments about, it was referring to some data information. Can you kind of give us where the data is to what you were referring to?
Can you remind me?
I know.
It flew out of my head.
We're going to come back to it because it has flown out of minds too. I'm so disappointed right now. But
Data around staff or about the time?
yes, the staff.
Okay.
So as it relates to the staff, and let me see if I can find my notes. I have so many here. I will just come back to you. Just don't move.
Okay.
Let me find my notes. Dr. Hook?
I just really wanted to go back to a comment that was made previously and say here today that DCFS is committed to collaborating with across all systems, and I think we are probably going to have to change the culture across the state, but we are dedicated and willing to put in that work. And so if doors aren't open or haven't been in the past, they are now. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that to everyone on the task force and anyone that's watching and listening.
Thank you. We appreciate that because that is the beginning, is the communication piece. I noticed somebody made a comment about the CACs, and we have Monica Taylor here, so we want to give her an opportunity to speak. But before y'all move, Judge Wumble has another question.
Look, I'm on different liaison task force with Judge Matlock, and DCFS has done some improvement. They've hired more people, I think, over the last year. I think, and y'all are doing amazing work. We just need some more. And this is very, very hard. And this is our babies. Just like you said, Senator, this is our babies.
Right. Ms. Denise, don't move yet.
Thank you.
I found it right quick.
Yeah. That's all.
As it relates to the reporting aspect with the staff and accepted, so where do y'all keep this information, this data? I know you keep it, but how is that being categorized?
The data on HR, the staffing?
No, as it relates to the reports with the reports that the staff is receiving.
Intakes, they
Intake,
actually
yes.
end up, we get over 4,000 a month.
So how do y'all keep that, and how do you keep it, and how is it categorized, and so the supervisors, the managers, et cetera, sees it, right?
Yeah, so in our application, call it Access. I know it's hard to visualize. It has the data reports where you can choose categories and export that. And then I do reports monthly on the types of reporters, how many intakes we received, the percentage that was accepted, what happened with what was the disposition, like refer to foster care, refer to FS. We also have types of reporters.
Okay.
The types that we're receiving. And with the changeover of the call center, I also, with our other provider, I had where I knew what prompt they chose, like immediate assistance number 1, I knew how many used that prompt. So there's different, I have 2 systems. I have the call center, and then I have the intakes.
So do you have categories like sexual abuse? So do you know, like from month to month, I'm assuming, how many you have for sexual abuse?
I don't have month to month right now. Did David pull? I think David, our data unit pulled some of that. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Yes.
Okay. So who receives it? So you receive it first, Ms. Denise, or who receives the reports?
The data team pulls it. I don't remember specifically getting one for sex abuse.
Okay, so who receives that?
So we do have what's called a dashboard that has a lot of like out-the-box reports that we can pull, and we base it on what we view as what the needs are. For instance, for the purpose of this committee, though, we were able to say, okay, well, we want to dive deeper into what are the reports about sex abuse, the percentages that we're receiving of sex abuse of the overall totals. And so we can request that. We do have a data unit who is able to pull all of that information that's available. We did provide some of that, and is that in the binder? Yeah, some of that is in the binder, and I can go over some of a summary of that information.
Okay. So I'm being told it's behind tab J, so it's gonna be too much for us to try to do today, but okay. So is this something that you guys receive monthly? So are you guys able to, is somebody actually receiving this monthly, or is this only upon request?
On specific sexual abuse, if it's the detailed information, it's not automatically sent out. There are certain indicators that we look at on a routine basis, and those reports are sent to various members of the administration and local and regional staff. We have an excellent data unit that compiles some of that data and sends out on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, depending on what the need is, as well as we have for every tri-region area, we have what's called a performance coordinator, performance measures coordinator, who also has the ability, based on like what Leslie might need behind us, to say, can I get a report on a weekly basis, a daily basis of whatever it is that she may need to monitor or want to monitor for her regions. But so, for instance, there is a standard report that goes out on a weekly basis to all of the executive child welfare management, all of the child welfare managers throughout the state, of the number of open cases. You're able to drill down by worker, which ones are beyond the 60-day time frame that we would like to ideally see a case closed by region, by office. So we do have a plethora of data available to us.
So I assume this is outsourced.
Yep.
Okay, so who's responsible for doing this?
I can get it for whatever you need.
Okay.
I can get whatever, whatever is available to us.
Well,
Okay.
we should know who's doing that.
It'll be, I would be the contact person. Okay.
But who's the agency tasked with doing this? Who has
With-
the contract?
Gather the information.
No, who's responsible for doing the data collecting that then is turned over, I assume, to you guys?
Okay, it's all internal.
So it's
within
internal, so it's not
DCFS
outsourced?
No, it's not outsourced. We have an
Okay.
internal staff team, the data unit, that belongs
Okay.
to child welfare, or their child welfare staff.
How many people are in that unit?
Ooh, I believe it's six or seven staff members.
Okay. So the report is not given monthly, but except for there are certain categories that you guys have distinguished or designed that comes to, I guess, a higher velocity or
Yeah, so
higher
we
degree
have,
of emergency.
Let me kind of describe it a little bit better. We have what's called the dashboard. That's whatever we need on a regular basis. If it's identified that we need it on a regular basis, those reports are generally placed on that dashboard for anybody within child welfare to access.
So it can be changed at any time based upon what you're seeing.
Yes.
Gotcha.
We can add reports to that dashboard. And workers, supervisors, administrators, everyone has access to that dashboard and those reports. Then, based on identified needs, we are able to request information. So, for instance, for this legislative hearing, we're able to request what we need for a specific need. And then we also have the ability to say to our data unit, this is a really important indicator that staff need to receive in their hands and in their email on a regular basis to review. And so we have that mechanism in place as well. So.
Okay. Dr. Hook?
Yes, I was just going to also add that we're working to implement a real-time dashboard through Access, and so that's right now on a trial basis. It's been distributed to our leadership in the field to help us monitor what calls are coming in, what priority those calls were assigned, how many of those calls have had contact made, and it can also be broken down by region and by worker. And we're reviewing that for the next 30 days, giving comments back, and then attempting to try to add or remove any of the functionality that isn't beneficial to us, and to enhance that so it's real time.
Okay, so you guys are actually really looking at that every 30 days.
Like
So-
this dashboard, we'd be able to look at. I could pull it up on my computer right now, and the hope would be that it would be able to automatically refresh and be real time. So I could look at
Okay.
it at any point of the day and have an idea of how many cases need to be made contact with, how many priorities ones we've gotten, and that would be for centralized intake and also for the field.
And so who evaluates, or who actually looks at that consistently?
So we just have distributed that to our team, and we're looking at it for the next 30 days. We hadn't had this functionality before. This is
Okay.
brand new. But the hope would be that both at state level and then in the regional offices, we'd be able to monitor that. And
Okay.
then that would help us to just to identify any issues that we might be having with any specific regions on meeting priority, or if we might be able to identify more quickly specific workers that may be having more difficulty with caseload in order to provide them assistance. So we're hoping the real-time monitoring will be really beneficial to us.
Okay, good. All right, I think that clears out the questions maybe for DCFS. And so now we'll hear from Ms. Monica Taylor with CACs. How you doing?
I'm great. Monica Taylor, Director of the Governor's Office of Human Trafficking Prevention. So I guess I'm kind of here in two hats, wearing two hats a little bit. Before I took this job with this administration, I was scheduled to be the president of the Louisiana Alliance of Child Advocacy Centers, the president of the board, which I had to resign my board membership because I took this job. And they have their end-of-year board meeting today, and so the executive director couldn't be here. You have Ms. Hadley on the board on the task force, who can provide you invaluable information about what goes on in the CACs, as well as DA Russell can provide that information. And I think there may be somebody from the Baton Rouge CAC here. I'm not sure if she is here. She can join me and give some information. But I can say the CACs, we work with them closely as partners and with DCFS. Our hotline for child sex trafficking goes to DCFS. So there is an option. There is a specific intake form that we have. I think there have been some conversations of maybe changing that intake form a little bit from some feedback that we have gotten from some of our partners. And we're working with an outside source who is going to be getting a grant to validate that survey that's being taken on the phone. So that will be an improvement. The one we have now works. It's fine. But we've had some pushback on it in a couple of different places. just to answer and address some of your previous questions for education, and I'm talking specifically about sex trafficking, we are running a pilot program right now with our CACs. So our CACs through Act 662, which now those dollars are permanently moved over to DCFS. Act 662 requires there to be 17 care coordinators around the state located at the 16 accredited or 14 accredited and 2 in the process of accreditation child advocacy centers in the state. We have 17 care coordinators who run NDT teams and provide outreach and education in their areas. We're working with them, partnering with them in Rotary. You have to go through each individual superintendent to get into a school system. And so we're working with Rotary right now because a lot of superintendents belong to Rotary. And so Rotary is helping us get into those schools. We're running a pilot program in EBR right now where we are training all school social workers, nurses, and guidance counselors in sex trafficking on how to prevent it, how to talk to the kids about it, how to recognize the signs of it. And so that's one of the programs we have. We also work extensively with the DA's Association that DA Russell is the president of. In case y'all didn't know, I'll tell on her and let everybody know that she's the president this year. And then we also work with the Louisiana Chiefs of Police Association, the Sheriff's Association. I think it's important to point out not only for sex trafficking, but also sexual child abuse. A lot of your police departments, we have 334, I think, in the state of Louisiana, municipal police departments. Some are appointed, some are elected. They're elected at different times of the year. They can have up to 1,000 employees. I think the largest has a little over 1,000 employees, and the smallest just has a part-time chief of police. And so it can vary greatly. In some cases, your chief of police will, or your municipality will contract with the sheriff's department to provide those larger services that are not just local policing, like writing tickets, barking dogs, but more sophisticated cases like child abuse. They will contract with sheriff's departments. What we do see across the board for MDTs is most of our sheriff's departments are very involved. It's your local municipalities that tend not to be as involved, and it's mainly just because they don't actually handle those cases, other than a patrol officer being first on scene. And then they refer it over, just like you would have a patrol officer refer it to a detective, they refer it to the sheriff's department. But our MDTs across the state have been fairly strong. And the work that the Louisiana Alliance of Child Advocacy Centers has done has been really outstanding, both in an educational aspect. So you have LACAC, which is the umbrella organization of the 16 child advocacy centers through the state. And if you're not familiar with the child advocacy model, they vary throughout the state. Some of them are standalone centers, so you take someplace like Gingerbread House that Miss Hadley works for. The only thing that they are is, not the only thing, but they specifically do just child advocacy work. In other parts of the state, for instance, in Lafayette, in that region, the local CAC is also the Sexual Assault Center. And in other regions, such as in Hammond, and for that region, they are a CASA and a CAC.
So there are 14.
That are nationally accredited.
How many? 11?
Yeah, there's 14 altogether. 11 are accredited, 3 are pending accredited.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
That's
Yes,
okay.
14, yes, thank you for
14
correcting me. I
total.
appreciate it. Yes.
11 are accredited. And
Three
you talk
are-
about 2 that were.
3 are pending.
No.
Oh.
In your earlier comments, you said there are 2, because you said 16.
Oh, yeah. So I misspoke on those numbers. Those
Okay.
numbers are 14 accredited.
Gotcha. Okay.
And 3 are 14 overall. 11 are accredited. nationally accredited.
3-year pending full accreditation.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for turning her on.
Yes.
Okay, so we have 64 parishes. We have 14 CACs who do a lot of, they assist, let me say it that way.
Yes.
The department greatly
Yes.
with these cases.
Yes.
Where are they? Do you know the locations of all 14?
I
'Cause
could
that
probably
is
tell
a
you, and that we may have it in there.
question.
Let's see, Jefferson, New Orleans.
Okay, here we go.
You got it? Thank you.
Yes. So Baton Rouge, Lafourche, Monroe, Hammond, Alexander, Lake Charles, Shreveport, Lafayette, Covington, Gretna, New Orleans, Ruston, Belle Chase, and Houma.
But let me tell you this, with this, unlike, so on adult sexual abuse in the state, we have some pockets of the state that are deserts that have no services whatsoever. Every parish is currently served
By one of these facilities?
by a CAC.
Okay.
So, for instance, I'll give you one example. Lafayette is one, and it's served by Hearts of Hope. Hearts of Hope serves, I think, 8 parishes for their CACs, and they have a satellite office in St. Mary Parish, and they have a satellite office in St. Landry Parish. So they have 2 satellite offices. So even though, for instance, Miss Hadley works for Gingerbread House, they are located in Shreveport. They serve other parishes besides just Caddo. They service a region.
And so I'm looking at it now. I'm looking at the map because initially I didn't see that. So I see the regions, I guess, or areas that they're all covering.
Yes.
Okay. Because I want to make sure that we didn't have that gap.
No, there's no gaps. There's no deserts of service for CACs. And that is mostly because of the way the Children's Code is written about forensic interviewing.
Okay.
And so that's why the funding that is given to CACs, even though they're an NGO, is so important.
Okay. Dr. St. Germain?
I just wanted to mention that if everyone is not aware of it, is that each region of the state, the person who controls or has the responsibility to perform those sexual assault exams, it's designated by the coroner's office. So that's probably another thing that, I guess, from my perspective, is to look at everyone's regional plan in the state, and that's through the Louisiana Department of Health.
So with the regional plans, what we have, the Louisiana Sexual Assault Oversight Commission, which is housed within the Attorney General's office, they have directed the LDH to go to a unified plan. So basically, you have the 9 regions, and they submit their plans to LDH, and then LDH then puts it into a unified plan. So there is a plan done every year. But I think specifically, if we're talking about this right now, and Ms. St. Germain, please correct me if I am wrong, because Ms. St. Germain is a SANE. She's a sexual nurse examiner, both A and P. Yeah, both adult and pediatrics. There are 11 pediatric SANEs in the state.
There may be a few more.
There's under 20, definitely under 20 sexual assault nurse examiners who were specifically trained in doing pediatric. There's only 52 SANE nurses in the state of Louisiana, and there's only about 31 of them, 30-ish of them practicing. And so we did a little over 3,000 sexual assault forensic cases, adult and pediatric, last year. And the majority, probably about 90% of those were done by sexual assault nurse examiners. An adult case can take anywhere from 6 to 12 hours just to collect the evidence off of the body of the victim. That's not including paperwork and going to court and preparing for court or any of those kinds of things. And just so nobody gets confused, there's a sexual assault forensic medical exam and a sexual assault, and then there's also a forensic exam. So those are two different things. There's a medical forensic exam, which is what a sexual assault nurse examiner, a nurse, or a doctor would perform. And then there is a forensic exam, which is something that Ms. Hadley performs and her cohorts who work at the child advocacy centers, which is an interview, a forensic interview. And so those are two different things, not exam, I'm sorry, I misspoke, a forensic interview. So there's a forensic medical exam and a forensic interview, and those are two separate things.
And I think, just to clarify, a lot of people think that, especially in children, because if it is sexual abuse, nurses are trained to do those, and they like you said, there's a handful that it's mainly acute. There are some centers that the nurses are also doing non-acute. All of that has to have oversight by somebody who is specially trained. Now, we have 4 to 5 forensic pediatricians in our state, 3 at Children's, 1 at Jefferson, 1 in Lafayette, and 1 in Shreveport. Is that right?
Yeah.
So that's 5 now, because Children's just hired a new one.
Right.
So one of the things that I want to make sure this year is that everyone does know that the nurses that are SANE trained for adults and adolescents are different than the pediatric trained. Those nurses should not be doing medical exams for anything but sexual assault. Because, I mean, I was trained by who I think is the best is Dr. Scott Benton, who is now over all of child abuse in the state of Mississippi. Those are very complicated cases. You need somebody who is trained higher and able to diagnose. And that's a lot of things we do get in court is, as a nurse, I cannot make a medical diagnosis because that's out of my scope of practice.
Right.
So if you know, you're looking to have us say, you know, is this, you know, child abuse? That's a medical diagnosis. We can't make that diagnosis, but a nurse practitioner can. So like Hearts of Hope, I think in Lafayette, that's Rebecca.
Rebecca,
And she is
yes.
a nurse practitioner. Ann Troy is a good friend of mine. She's at Children's in New Orleans. She's a nurse practitioner. They can make those diagnoses. So if you're calling a SANE, we call them SANE Ps, pediatric trained, they're not going to be able to make that diagnosis, but they can talk about trauma. And a lot of times that's the important part is, you know, is it acute trauma? Is it, you know, healed trauma? Things like that. So thanks for bringing that up because that's
and
really important.
One of the things that you pointed out is you were talking about some of the children you've seen. An exam, medical forensic exam for a child, for juvenile, is incredibly different than that of an adult for lots of reasons. Not necessarily because of the time frame. That is one of the pieces. We say for adults for all sexual abuse cases, 120 hours. A lot of times a SANE can still get evidence after 120 hours. Even if they've showered or bathed, you should still have them looked at. But mostly what you're doing a lot of times in a juvenile, an adolescent, or a pediatric, under 12 pediatric, in those cases is you're checking for STDs, you're checking for pregnancy, for any kind of external injuries and DNA, foreign DNA externally. There's no internal exam for children. That is completely against policy.
And the national protocol is 120 days on pediatrics. I would like to see the state move to 120 days.
And that's usually when I do a lot of training of law enforcement. We always tell them if it's 120 days, 120 hours, sorry, not 120 days, 120 hours. If it's 120 hours, always contact a sexual assault nurse examiner and let them make that determination. Or if you're not exactly sure exactly how long it's been, contact them, let them make that determination, and they can decide. Even if it's been more than that, a lot of times you still need to do an STD check.
Okay, because I was definitely going to ask for that 120 days.
Sorry, I misspoke.
Okay.
Didn't have enough coffee this morning. I'm sorry, Senator.
Well, I'm tell you, I have been discombobulated since that testimony from Dr. St. Germain earlier. I'm trying to get myself back together. Dr. Hook? Was that all, Dr. St. Germain?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
About the capacity at the CACs, is there a wait time if forensic interview is needed in different regions of the state? And are you all staffed enough to be able to meet the need for the children in Louisiana?
I'm going to let Ms. Hadley answer that question.
So every staffing at CAC is different just based on what regions they cover. For us at Shreveport, we're a staff of 15.
I'm sorry.
We cover 9 parishes. And so it just varies based on what span of region that you cover is how many you'll have on staff. We are always on call. So we do not lag, or we're not backed up on our forensic interviews. Especially, we definitely fill in, especially for those crucial cases, younger ones. We don't want them to wait longer for an interview, so we will even make time for an interview. And with our after hours, we're on call 24/7, 365, all the time, abuse never stops. So we're always available, ready, and willing to conduct forensic interviews. So that's never an issue of our side hindering forensic interview times.
I know that some of the smaller CACs may have a lag time of like 24 hours. But, usually they're not, like you said, they're not like backed up with them.
So
Yeah.
the closest ones we have, Ruston's a smaller CAC that's closer to us.
Yes.
And a lot of time we will assist as well. Of course, we have our MDT that's within our jurisdictions that we can exchange and share information with, but we also assist and support each other statewide as a CAC. So for whatever reason, if they also need to see Dr. Rodriguez, our medical doctor, they don't want to just do an interview at Ruston and then take them all the way to Shreveport for a medical. So they'll just sometimes use us to do everything all in one day. So it's just convenient and helps support the families. So we all try to work as close together to support each other, even if it's cross jurisdictions.
Right.
To follow up, we have sent out additional information to our staff to make sure that we are focusing on collaborating with law enforcement and the CACs for any of these joint investigations in order to minimize any type of inflicted trauma based on the investigation for children. And so if you have any issues with that occurring, just please let us know, because we really want to focus on that.
We also reach out to our agencies if we see that someone is not being connected, or if there's additional information that I knew, like say a DCFS investigator was on. As the director of forensic interviewing, I make my point to reach out to those agencies like, hey, this suspect has been a suspect in a different parish before, because we have our database, and our database goes back to when we were open in 1998. And so if we had a suspect back in 2000, and it's a suspect again, and he's current, we inform our law enforcement. We also inform the DCFS investigator, again, because we understand history is a big importance and pattern of behavior is important. So we will reach out to the agencies to make sure they stay connected and informed.
Okay, thank you so very much. Before everybody starts to leave, I know that we are now entering into lunchtime for everyone. Judge Green prepared a memo for us to kind of see, I guess, the process. And Judge, I want to give you an opportunity to speak to this, and we thank you for giving this to everyone. So when we meet again, and I guess in the interim, if you have any questions, you can reach out to the Judge Green.
Good morning, everyone. it really is a summation of the role of family court. I think our juvenile court judge kind of indicated some of the barriers. I did want to highlight that the investigation process, which is what we're looking at, starts way before it comes to family court. We don't have the timelines that juvenile has, which would get it in, in a very quick time. And so what we look at is it's extended way longer than what you would see on a regular juvenile case. When I say extended, unless someone files an emergency custody case alleging sexual abuse, that's the only case that comes immediately. Or the same day. You can file the same day, be heard the same day. Also, unless we have a duty judge that addresses our, if it is alleged on a duty day, then it will be addressed through a temporary restraining order just from the allegations that is presented. And typically what happens is law enforcement goes out to the home and says, you need a restraining order, just from listening to the statements of whomever is addressing it, and then they come and file restraining orders, which are free. There's no filing fee in family court. When you file that restraining order, we review the allegations, and the duty judge on that day will hear it, but the actual hearing itself happens 2 weeks later. And so what you have here is kind of that process, and what the trier of fact, which I am, would look at. I'm looking for the evidence and testimony, if any. And if we're looking to see if there's a DCFS investigation, I very seldom will get that report that was mentioned earlier. I get a lot of attorneys who allege that there is a DCFS report. But one thing that is missing, you would see that we speak about the evidence or testimony from expert witnesses. These usually are counselors that were sent, that the attorneys or the parents sent their child to validate the claim of sexual abuse. I very seldom get explanations on medical records. I get subpoenas for medical records that come in, and the attorneys will attempt to introduce those things. But even the medical records have, as I stated here, some hearsay issues. So attorneys, if they are represented by attorneys in those custody cases, the attorney will do their best to keep that information out. We also have, as I stated earlier, mental health professionals that come in, and I can order them to do evaluations. They do not come quickly, and even if I order them, there are costs associated with those evaluations that most families, poverty-stricken families, cannot afford, and usually those are not those that came through the restraining order process. Those are those that have private attorneys that then request evaluation to be done. I can assess the costs. Those are the witnesses. So we talked about the investigation, the expert witness, or the mental health professional, and then we go a little bit into if a child is the witness. Typically, as I stated last time, the Watermeyer hearing is the best way to get the child's testimony, but that's the last resort for me. I'm looking to see if there's any other witnesses, and again, DCFS is typically what's alleged. If you see in that last paragraph on the second page is that investigations by DCFS along with their caseworkers may be presented in court through testimony or in-camera inspection. Senator Barrow, Louisiana Revised Statute 4656H3 is kind of where we get we get stopped, because I cannot subpoena an employee of DCFS to come in. They can do the in-camera inspection. I can request through production. The other attorneys can request through productions. And a lot of the statements that I heard today was the district attorney's office. They're not in my civil court. I have attorneys that have requested production of documents for those medical records or the reports to be produced. And again, if they're not producing them to the DA's office, they're definitely not producing them to, or timely producing them to the private attorneys. And so we need another continuance on this trial or this hearing, if that is the case. And I do have another way around that is I can do an order where I can ask DCFS if there is a pending investigation, which I believe that's the best way I can get some information and I ask them, is it a ongoing case? And so they can tell me so that I'm not, again, being pulled along by attorneys and allegations that may not be validated. I'm not even at the letter of validation. I'm just saying that I can order them to produce, to respond, and they can say, well, Judge, I do know that it's being investigated. It's an open investigation. I can't give you a timeline, and I can say that in court to allow the attorneys additional time for them to present their case. Because again, the only evidence I have is physical evidence, medical records. They have videos, but no one's producing videos of sexual assault. More domestic violence, physical abuse, but sexual assault gets kind of tricky. And it becomes allegations, maybe text messages that were mentioned, or things of that nature. But if I do get the report, which I've had in the last year, good success on them submitting it in camera, then I can provide my recommendation before we get to the actual hearing. And so I just wanted to give y'all that the role of the family court. And again, we don't have CASAs, we don't have, I can order them to go to a CAC, but that's very rare because of the magnitude of cases that we have. And again, the sexual abuse allegations, I'm happy to hear the information in regards to the nursing and the forensic exams, because every day it's an allegation of, and they usually only use the day they come to, what do they call it, when you go to court, not court, when you go to the hospital and you do the intake report, and that's what the attorneys bring in. See, the nurse said this, or the medical provider, and to be honest, I would prefer what you're saying, was there a sexual assault forensic investigation or forensic exam, which I can guarantee you, and typically it's probably not happened on my level in family court. And again, the perpetrator, I gave you some law on it, but the perpetrator would have to be familiar relationship in my court. And so some of this is outside of my realm, but it's usually a family member or sibling. I get a couple of sibling cases, and it takes a minute. And what the result is, you always ask, what does it affect? The effect is that parents are limited on custody. They will get supervised, or they won't get custody at all until they have been treated. Or sometimes if it goes to the criminal sector, then that would stop the custody arrangement. And for the children, that's the child-on-child sibling abuse, then we have to limit that child and that other child's interaction. So sometimes you're separating homes. Sometimes you have blended families where the abuse comes from the new family member, the new sibling. And so then we have to tell dads and moms that you can't have custody time when your child is present. So that's kind of the limit that I have and what I have access to in making the rulings. Because again, well, the court didn't do this. The court doesn't have it's kind of like when you said, is it valid? Doesn't mean that it didn't happen if you start your investigation. It doesn't mean that if I make a ruling that protection is not necessary, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. I didn't have enough credible evidence. And you see why, because I have a lot of hearsay objections and things that block it. So thank y'all for listening. I do have to leave, but I'm open to any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. So I do want to ask you, as you stated, the statute RS 462135. Do you have any recommendations? And you may not be able to answer that today, but are there suggestions or recommendations that you would have that could make it easier for you to be able to do that?
So two things is, I can't remember the lady's name. She spoke about, I think Miss Denise may have spoke about there's a history of abuse that is presented, and the recording and things of that nature. For us, once there's sexual abuse that has been established, then the perpetrator name goes into our, what is called LPOR registry repository. So I see it in here that it says there's a repository, but LPOR is the one that if you have been designated or convicted of sexual abuse or you have a protective order, then there's a history that we can follow you. So I think that helps, especially in family relations. And my recommendation would be that you guys kind of look at the LPOR laws, bring that in this process to see that when we're doing those protective orders and temporary restraining orders, are following the same level, especially with sexual abuse. And then lastly, the Law Institute is all I can direct. There's a lot of questions about language. It's not a quick change for the law. The Law Institute has meetings monthly in regards to things that are recommended by laypersons, attorneys, on changes to specific words and terms, because it all connects. If you see, I defined a perpetrator by law, which is different from what you guys may say a perpetrator is. And then if not, the Law Institute, I heard lack of supervision may need to be expanded. Law Institute may be able to help with that. And then, legislators are the lawmakers. And so they can help with that. I am now on the Law Institute calls, and so I can understand it. The practitioners are on there as well. So they are, very adamant about not changing certain things or why we shouldn't change it, why we should change it. And it's not to help benefit them. It just makes it a little bit more difficult when you have all these agencies that have learned that term for so many years. Then the what the judge is looking to for imminent harm may have to be changed if we change the terms. We've been taught that, what we should look for. And so I think that's the only issue I may have, but my recommendation is maybe see if the Law Institute has had anyone suggest that some of these sexual abuse laws or the LPOR laws be reviewed.
Okay. And so we're going to go to Ms. Wascom.
Senator, before I leave the
Okay,
table, if I
sure.
could just say one thing real quick, sorry.
No.
The only thing I would say, I usually give you bad news. I'm going to give you some good news today.
Great. I need some good news after.
So with the call center, there is the DCFS hotline. They take all the calls on juvenile sex trafficking, whether it's perpetrated by they take the calls. They don't necessarily get involved in the cases if it's not a parent, a custodial parent, or a parent or guardian. But they do take all of the calls. So any tips or anything that people have that come in. Once those calls come into their hotline, it may go into their system and follow their path if it meets that criteria. But it will go to our care coordinators, and then it also goes to the State Police Fusion Center, and the State Police looks at those. One of the things that we learned when I took over this position at the beginning of the year is that State Police was having a little bit of a bottleneck for several reasons. One, they didn't have enough investigators, which we've addressed that issue. And the other one is staffing at the Fusion Center. And so my office has used the money. We're in the fourth year of a 3-year federal grant. Do that federal math. But we're in the fourth year of a 3-year grant where we've just closed the solicitation for 2 analysts at the State Police Fusion Center. Okay. And we will be paying for those 2 analysts to help with those calls and cases that come through so that we can disseminate where they need to go. Do they need to go to local law enforcement? Do they need to stay with state police? And then those analysts will also also be able to help with some open source investigations. We have been asked by USDOJ to apply for a new 3-year grant in 2025 to extend those positions and pay for them. And then, of course, that'll give us 4 years of data on how those positions have worked out in the Fusion Center before I come to the legislature in 4 years and ask for full funding for those positions.
Okay, well, we need to be working on that now.
So that is some very good news. We're hoping that we'll be able to address more of those cases and have more of an avenue for when people do call in for the 14-year-olds who have had an abortion or who are in the hospital having babies. Senator Mizell fusses at me all the time about 11-year-olds going to the hospital to give birth and no one calling to report that. And so these are things that we are trying to work on.
Well, that is good news. I'm glad that that is being put into place, and hopefully it's going to be all coordinated, and so that we are able to receive this information in real time and being able to be more proactive rather than reactive to what's happening.
Yeah.
I do want to try to move us along a little quicker because of the sake of time. Ms. Wascom, I know that you want to talk with us about.
And I'll make it super quick.
Yes, because now I'm wondering if we need to invite the Law Institute or someone representing them to help us. We're looking at language and changing wording so that they can understand the impetus behind what we're attempting to do and the urgency, more or less, behind it as well.
Well, I was going to say, too, that I can pull Ms. Shelton into this because we've actually discussed this. So,
Okay, sure.
okay, so just real quick, I want to just for the record, I want to make sure that, I know we all talked about language last time. I'm going to make this really quick because I know we're running out of time. But I want to read onto the record what the definition of invalid and what its synonyms are and kind of why it flagged it for me. Everyone in this room views that word differently than the lay person in the public does. So if you looked it up in the dictionary, it's going to say, I'm going to verbatim read it. It is invalid means not valid, not founded in truth, fact, or logic, and hence weak or indefensible. Its synonyms are false, untrue, bad, wrong, incorrect, inaccurate, erroneous, and we can keep going. So you can see that if a child, if a child is aware that they get a validity letter from DCFS and it says it's invalid, that they feel like they're not being believed, which also means that later on they're not going to disclose further, when really legally it means that there's not sufficient evidence to proceed. So I've had several conversations with Ms. Shelton about the Children's Code, the language there. It was interesting for both of us to see that invalid and valid are not actual legal terms. Those are policy and procedure terms. So the law says that uses sufficient or insufficient. So, and I'm going to send all this out to y'all. I just didn't want to throw it to y'all ahead of time. My immediate suggestions would be to change and I did get feedback from attorneys and therapists that work with children post sexual abuse, to change it to verified and unable to verify. I did go through the DCFS, the terms that the other states use. I did have additional recommendations, but I think that's for a later date. But in the immediate time, I think that you could reflect easily in the validity letters. So in Form 471, 472, 474, and 480. And I would also additionally update with some trauma-informed care language in those notification letters. That would be my immediate, and I could do more, but something that Ms. Shelton and I started looking at were the other states, their letters, the validity letters, and the language used. So I do think the law, and whoever decides that kind of language, I think if she and I both feel like if we're really going to update some code, that's like a commission issue, like further. But an easy win, I think, in the immediate would be to change those two words.
Agreed. And just full disclosure, I did talk to Sherry Powell with DCFS about this issue as well, and what me and Audrey discussed. And I think that that would be something we could look at, is those two words do have meaning, and that is something we could change. And I do agree with Audrey about providing more information and clearer information in those letters. That's not required by law to have certain language. We can revise that now and not have to change the law.
Okay. Well, that sounds like that sounds like a victory for us today. Yes. And so, Ms. Tatum, I asked you to come to the table, and then I'm going to ask if we have any public comments. I haven't received any cards, so I don't know if we do. Oh, okay. Hand it to him. Hand it to our Sergeant at Arms.
Everybody seems it's like kind of time.
Well, no. You need to come to the table, please.
It seems like everybody's kind of ready to go. If I can reserve my right to speak at the next meeting, I'm fine to do that if y'all want a break.
I will leave that totally up to you. I will say to everyone, I know that I try to have my meetings conducted within a 2-hour window, but this issue is so important, and I know it is lunchtime, and I did not get lunch today, and we have fallen short, so please forgive me. But if you have to leave, I do understand, but I'm going to stay and hear it, and then people can always go back and listen.
Okay. My name is Casey Robry. I came today.
Wait, so you have public testimony?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to take you a little bit after everybody else I have right quick. Denise Evans. So these are all the individuals who have Leslie Lyons and Sherry Powell. Okay, so these are all the individuals who have spoken. Was there anybody else from the department who wanted to speak? And Ms. Tatum, I asked you to come back up, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, so this may be a question you can, Christy. I'm sorry, Mona. I am so sorry. You may or may not be able to answer this question, because I have not been able to get beyond this. Is the issue that happened. What parish was that? What parish? Region 9.
There's
Okay.
a Region 9 issue and there's a Region 1 issue.
Okay. The one that you had talked about in particular, where the perpetrator, yes, is now working.
Region 1.
Region 1. Okay. How did that happen? Like, how did that individual get through, or was not? How is he now he or she is working with another child who, in this situation, for me, is in more of a more vulnerable stage than our other children. How did this fall through the crack? And I don't know if you can answer it, because I don't know if this is an education question per se, but certainly it's a licensing issue. But how, if you can't answer, just tell me, because I'm going to find out how this happened.
Of like an educational institution and their position on hiring or not. In terms of like if it is a teacher and a child perpetration, we would not investigate that. That would be law enforcement as well. So I guess it would be also, does the school system require criminal records checks? Was that person convicted of that as well? That could be something to look into. I know for daycares, the licensing through LDOE does require a state central registry clearance for all potential child care employees.
Who requires that?
The Department of Education.
So
but
they
that
have a
is
registry.
Yes, our registry. So anytime that a person is validated for abuse or neglect, there's, depending on the allegation, the person is placed on a state central registry. And so based on that, child care agencies will request a clearance from our agency for child care employees, potential employees, as to whether or not they are on the abuse or neglect registry that we maintain. But
Is
in
that
this
only for childcare?
situation-
Yeah, is that only for childcare?
It's only for childcare, yes, and for residential licenses as well.
Okay.
But in this situation, it does not sound like that individual would appear on our state central registry because that would have been a law enforcement matter as compared to a DCFS matter.
Okay, thank you. And so now, at this point, I will take any public testimony. Casey Robbery? Yes, ma'am, please speak.
I
And
actually
introduce yourself again.
My name is Casey Robry. I actually am a protective parent. My 2 young girls are actually, their father is being investigated currently for sexual abuse. I have worked with Ombudsman Ritchie. I was actually one of the parents, and my children's case was actually spoken about at the last meeting. So I want to come and kind of share testimony and the story and maybe help you guys figure out some of the failures that have happened, because every agency that has been put in place to protect my children have failed us. Part of my story is family court, so I know that Ombudsman Ritchie just had to step out and Judge Green left, so I think might be more useful for me to come next meeting for
Okay.
us to really have a good conversation.
Okay, all right.
If that's
then.
okay.
That's fine, because certainly we want to, as I was listening to Judge Green, I could see some of the, what I would call hiccups, or where there are gaps in terms of how that process actually works. And so I wanted to read what she had given us, because I didn't have a chance to really read it, but
I think
kind
one
of
of the
understand the
biggest
process a
failures
little bit better.
in this whole process can be family court, so I think it's very important to have her here. So I would like to speak next meeting,
Okay.
if that's okay.
That'll be fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any? Yes, sir. Did you fill out a card? Okay. Well, you come on to the table, and you can fill this card out right here. You go ahead and introduce yourself, and fill out that card and give it to our Sergeant at Arms. Okay, that's okay. We're here to hear what you have to say. Okay.
With sexual abuse charges that I can't get no one to listen. I keep ramming that brick wall, hoping to break a hole in it.
Okay.
What is I'm supposed to do? Yes, we called CPS. Nothing happened. We called the cops. Nothing happened. We keep hitting a brick wall. She showed us on a dial, 2.5 years old, how they hurt her private. How do a 2.5-year-old kid know if that didn't happen? I don't know what else to do.
Okay.
I don't know how to read and write. But I know my grandbaby, I don't want her in a dumpster.
Oh, God. Okay. We are going to help you. So tell us a little bit. So your case has been reported.
Yes, ma'am.
Where's your grandbaby?
In Terrebonne Parish.
So your grandbaby is with
The daddy right now.
the dad who is doing the crime, who's violated her.
She said mommy hurt her private. But my son is the dad. He told his mama, we raised this baby for 2.5 years. And she was making certain motions that just ain't normal. Like humping the floor, or maybe the best way to explain it. And it's just like, no, I wanted to confront him. I had people stop me and say, no, they're going to take her to Minnesota. We're never going to see her again. But she's 15 minutes from my house, and they won't let us see her because they scared what she would tell us would hurt them. And that's all in text messages. We got him telling, my son telling an attorney, a lawyer, see, the judge ordered my grandbaby to go to Minnesota and get molested. He didn't say molested. I'm using this as my words, and I hope I don't offend nobody up here, because we need help. We need more than one person watching over, because Homer is a corrupt little town. You see, this one knows that one, so if you know this one, it's okay to do this. But if you don't know this person, okay, now, oh, no, that's wrong. And people think I'm just pulling things out of thin air. I can show you text messages. Look, she's going up there and she come back and it's this. Oh, I didn't say that. But the law enforcement won't even follow what he said here. Then what he said here. And okay, well, this ain't adding up. You can ask me something I said from the beginning. And it's gonna be the same, pretty much word for word. And I'll tell you why. Something I know now that my mom and dad taught me when I was a kid. The truth don't change. Only lies change. We can't get nobody to help us. No, nobody, none. We come from home to come here to, I'm hoping it's not a brick wall. I'm hoping I bust through where somebody can help my grandbaby. Forget about me. I'm old enough. Throw me in the dumpster. I'll take the dumpster. But I don't want my grandbaby there. I seen her yesterday. I got out the car. I said, I love you, my baby. Football loves you. She looked at a strange lady and said, who is that? I said, it's Papa Quincy, my baby. It's Papa Quincy. I got pictures on my phone how her face used to light up. I would want to go smoke a cigarette. She would go block the door. She was that attached.
How old is she now?
She's, I think, 4.
4. So you guys haven't seen her in 2 years?
We ain't seen her since May 13th of last year.
Okay.
It's almost 2 years. And we had her for 2 years. We raised that baby just consistently in our home.
So you say you talked to law enforcement. Was this local law enforcement?
He told us this was local law enforcement. I don't want to say no name. I don't want to get no one upset. They already don't like me. But I don't care. I'm not going to stop. Just either I'm in a dumpster or I don't know. I'm here to help. I need help.
Okay.
So maybe, sir, you can tell this panel what has happened in the investigation process to have led to this point. Maybe help them understand where the failures were. Was she forensically interviewed?
We went to Children's. And my son, come there with us, okay? Let's see, let me back up. I didn't know what to do. Just like right now. I said, I'm gonna find the DA. So I go to the courthouse. And when I left my house, my intentions was to go talk to the DA. When I walked in, they got security where they check your pockets and stuff. I didn't really know where to go. I didn't know. So I walked up to the security people and I said, excuse me, can you direct me where to go for a grandparent to protect his grandbaby? And they checked me and they guided me down the hall where I went and talked to this lady cop that was supposed to do an interview with the baby. Her name was, well, I might not know to be able to say her name. I'm gonna just keep her name. If y'all need to know it after, I'll tell y'all. But anyway, talked to her. She said, have the baby here January 20th at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock. I said, okay. Went back home because I think this was on a Friday. So I went back home, told my wife, I said, I gotta have the baby there Monday morning at 8:30, 9 o'clock-ish. So I did. My son would not come. He would not come. His lawyer, Kent, his lawyer that I hired to protect my grandbaby that we had to put in his name. See, the judge ordered certain things. We had to get him a lawyer to fight for the baby. We paid for it, him and his mom, me and my mom, my wife, his mama. Well, anyway, when we get there, I got my grandbaby sitting on my lap. My daughter come with me. The cop says, where's the legal guardian, the parent, to sign? I can't interview her without a signature. So that didn't take place. He wouldn't come because he said his lawyer said, don't get involved.
Which, can I interrupt you? I will say that there is a huge trend going on in our state and actually in our country right now. It's a very, very dangerous place for a protective parent to be, is in family court proceedings, because if you allege sexual abuse by a parent, you're at an 82% chance of being disbelieved. And you will lose some custody or all custody of that child. And so a lot of lawyers are now telling their clients to keep quiet about abuse because you're at such great risk of losing your child.
That's sickening to me.
The UN just came out with a report. They investigated child sexual abuse and physical abuse within family court systems. And that is what they have came to found. It's more likely that you will be found believable if it's physical abuse, but it's very unlikely that you'll be believed if it's sexual abuse cases. And really the reasoning behind that is because these parents come in and they're perpetrators, right? The built-in defense that you can use for sexual abuse allegations is the parent made it up, right? So that takes the doorbell tactics, denies attacks, and reverses the victim and offender. So let's say if it's a father, he's going to allege that the mother's crazy or vindictive and making this up. And so the focus now turns to if that person is actually abusing that child, to the protective parent if they're making it up or have mental illness or something that's going on if there's just a high conflict situation. So it's a very, very dangerous place for a parent to be to allege specifically sexual abuse because it is so unlikely, like Dr. Hooks said last meeting, the likelihood of physical evidence for child sexual abuse is very low. And so if there is no evidence, kind of like Judge Green was saying previously, it's very hard to have that evidence to be believed. So all we do is rely on these child statements. And it's very easy for someone to say a 2-year-old is making it up, right? Children don't make that up. It's not normal for children to behave this way, correct?
No, it's not.
It ain't. And I actually, after all that was said and done, the interview didn't happen. So we went and talked to the sheriff.
The interview did not happen?
The interview didn't happen. My son,
So when you showed up, what happened? So when you showed up, what?
they said the parent wasn't there to sign, so they cannot do it.
Hold on. Let me add everybody. Let me see. Okay, here we go.
This was at the courthouse, the interview that was supposed to be conducted.
Yes,
Did
it
she
was
say
the
what
police station
type?
into it's the building. I walked into the courthouse, but like,
It's like a substation for a police station as well?
ma'am, I guess, cause like they go there to clock in or whatever, or maybe the children's place might have been.
Has this child ever been to any advocacy center whatsoever?
Advocacy center wouldn't even get back to us cause she wasn't 3 years old.
Okay,
I
and
like
advocacy centers
that
do
one.
vary. It does vary depending on age, but that's a whole other situation.
Well,
But
anyway, I went and talked to the sheriff himself. He told me and my wife, because when you're going through this, your emotions kind of get over on you.
Right.
So you over here saying something, and then you over here saying something. And he was like, listen, I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. Go home, make up a timeline. Come back with the timeline. But to make sure we doing it right, we going through our evidence and making sure we putting dates and times right, because you know how they go. Oh, you said the 17th, and it was actually the 12th. So we went and do it right. Put it together. He wouldn't even look at it after we did that. Wouldn't even look at it.
First of all, I want to commend you both for being here today and raising a voice and a room where people want to hear your voice. I do want you guys to know you are not the only ones in this state. And I've heard similar cases.
It actually occurs a lot more than you would believe.
I believe you on that wholeheartedly. And I want to make sure, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but I want to make sure that we have proper information without exposing the children in this public matter, respecting their confidentiality. And I want to make sure that we can connect you and do the best that we can to serve you guys. The fact that you guys are here advocating says so much.
I have stuff on my phone. I can let you read that he told his lawyer. And we got it because it was on my phone. I got a company phone. I own that phone. So I was able to get it off of there, and I screenshotted it. Exactly what he was telling his lawyer. The day before I was supposed to have her in the police station. How this was going on and how bad it was getting after each and every visit. But oh no, they didn't say that, but I can show you in their own words. But how dare I look at my own phone and get evidence? They want me to lift that up this high and throw my grandbaby under the bus. They can forget about that. I'll keep hitting brick walls. I ain't doing it. Her life's at stake. I'll give mine up for her.
Thank you. Okay. This is so troubling for me. But you are not going to hit a brick wall.
Ma'am?
You're not going to hit a brick wall. No, sir.
I want to believe you. I want to.
We are definitely going to help you. Dr. St. Germain?
And again, your bravery for being here and standing up for your grandchild and your children is very important. You are a citizen of this United States, and you can make that phone call to DCFS and open another investigation. I think that's one thing you can do. I think law enforcement, again, I don't know your jurisdictions, but that's certainly something that you can pursue again, even though it is, I'm not sure if it's occurring continuously now or not, but the good thing is that she does need to be seen, and you have concerns. I can get you an appointment at a child advocacy center with a nurse practitioner, probably in a couple of days.
They won't even let me
See, that's the problem.
speak to her.
Which is part of the problem when this happens over extended period of time and the child is not with someone that's safe, they typically stop disclosing. Because, and I will tell you, and I will share my story next time in full, but my children have gone to a child advocacy center when I reported to the police, and they were forensically interviewed. My children were 2 and 4 years old, and they both disclosed sexual abuse in detail, even demonstrated on a dial. And they are in the sole custody of their father right now, who has had multiple investigations with DCFS and is still under investigation right now with DCFS. And nothing has been done to protect them.
So Mona, I need you to come back to the table because I need you to help us walk through and get this. We got to take steps to address certainly this gentleman's situation now.
Right, and two of our staff members, Connie Guillory, who is over field services, and Leslie Lyons, who is the regional administrator for that area, are outside speaking with your wife to get the information necessary to look into it further.
Okay. I want to be kept abreast of this particular situation because what I know, not what nobody told me, but what I know, in small areas where people know each other, they cover situations. That's what I do know. So if we need to bring in folks beyond those folks to make sure that this situation is being completely evaluated, then I want to make sure that that's happening. What I don't want is to be sitting on that review panel in a few more months and this be the case. We have to be more intentional. I'm not fussing because I know that y'all are doing the best you can. But see, this kind of stuff right here really almost sends me into like a whole different arena because sometimes we know, and I'm saying we know what's happening, but because of who's involved, we act like we don't see it. And that right there is going to have to stop. So I'm asking you, please keep me abreast, work this situation through. We're going to, Ms. Robery,
I know
look
we've
forward
spoken
to.
before, and I'll
Yes,
reach
I
back out
remember.
to you
I remember.
too, and
Yes.
some other bills maybe for next session that we can discuss.
Yeah. Okay. You have not run into a brick wall, sir. And I personally will be engaged in this process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
From the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Thank you for my grandbaby.
It takes a lot of bravery to come up here and speak not only to a room full of professionals at this way, but sometimes when you come and speak up, and I will only speak for myself, but it is scary to come here because not only the people in this room that can make decisions for my children, or to be quite honest, have failed my children, or other people that can view this, I can have repercussions for coming here and speaking out. And that's really scary. So thanks for having the bravery to do that.
I do want to commend both of you. It is a shame.
I will have repercussions.
And honestly, I want to honor you. When I first started needing help with my case and I started speaking to people in the community and to lawmakers and people in the media, they always said, speak to Senator Barrow. If there is anyone that has a heart for women and children, it is her. And you live that out every day, and I honor you for that.
Thank you. But this should not be the situation. It should not be repercussions for standing up for our most vulnerable population, our kids.
Our children.
They are the next generation. We got to protect them at all costs. If there's nothing more, I think I am going to move that we adjourn, and I'm going to ask that you stay directly in contact with me because we need to take this to state police, whomever. We are not letting it go. Monica, where are you? Okay, all right. I'll get the governor's office. Everybody's going to be engaged. All hands on deck.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank all of y'all.
Thank y'all. Merry Christmas, everybody.